What happened when a cop realized, oh, I think we caught the wrong guy? Oh, I've got two, from 25 years ago when I was a cop. One on one side of the badge and one from the other. The first, I got assigned a warrant service to pick up a wanted felon. Mr. Robertson was 6 foot tall, 250 pounds, bushy red beard, and lived at, let's say, 123 Elm Street. Pretty distinctive dude. So I rolled up to 123 Elm Street, and sure enough, there mowing his lawn in the front yard is the man himself. 6 foot, 250 pounds, red hair, red beard. I made contact with him. Hey, Mr. Robertson, you got warrants and it's time to go to jail. Hook him up, take him to jail, and in central booking I get his property off him, and while filling out the inventory, I happen to notice this guy is Mr. Robinson, not Robertson. Sure enough, the wanted guy was this guy's landlord and his twin brother from another mother doppelganger. When I'd said Robertson, Robinson didn't even twig the fact that I hadn't said his name. He just heard the familiar-sounding name as his own one. We had to walk the whole thing back and reactivate the warrant, then kicked him loose with a handshake and an apology. The one from the other side had just gotten off duty at 2 a.m. and was driving home still in my uniform. There wasn't any other traffic on the road, so I wasn't really surprised when a police car turned in behind me and started following me. I figured he was trolling for drunks and I was the only thing moving on the road, so he was just going to follow me a little to observe my driving, and he'd realize pretty quick that I was sober and peel off. Instead, another patrol car joined him, and another, and another. Then all four lit me up and spread out behind me, blocking the road in a full felony stop. Well, this just got interesting. They went through the whole procedure and I carefully followed their instructions. When they finally got me out and saw my uniform, they just stopped for a few seconds while I was trying to figure out just what the heck was going on. Then 3 of the officers got in their cars, turned off their lights and took off, while the original officer told me I could put my hands down and explained what was going on. Turns out my car was a spot-on match for the suspect vehicle in an armed robbery and shooting that had just occurred right up the road. I'd driven right by the scene before the cops even got there a few minutes before the officer in the next district spotted me and thought I was the suspect. It was an interesting night. In our family, we had a great uncle who tattooed his name and social security number to his shoulder. Apparently, he had the same name and birthday as another guy with a prison record, and had kept hearing about it. It came in handy at least twice when he was pulled over and the cops started arresting him. Each time he got out because he had his social security as proof that he was innocent. Note to self: tattoo my American doppelganger's social security number on my shoulder. Step 2, become serial bank robber in the States. Step 3, profit. Kinda makes you wonder if anyone realized what number they were looking at when this guy went to the beach or something. 2 of my colleagues, who were murder squad detectives, attended custody to meet a defendant answering bail. When they arrived at the custody desk, there were a couple of people hanging around waiting for their solicitors. They gave the custody sergeant the name that they were there for, and he pointed one of the guys out. They went up and introduced himself and said that they'd be questioning him at another station, so all 3 got in the car and headed out. Whilst driving, they told the defendant what would be happening. On arrival, he'd be arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, questioned and either bailed or remanded. The guy was like, "You've got to be joking. Attempted murder? I was shoplifting." He was relatively calm, half laughing and shaking his head. A short time later, one of the officers got a call from the custody sergeant. Their actual bail appointment had arrived. There were 2 defendants with the same name answering bail that day. They apologized to the non-murderous shoplifter, turned the car around and headed back to bring down the right person for questioning. Keystone Cops to the max. I was actually the wrong person in question. There was another man 2 years younger than me who shares my first and last name, exact same spelling, the only difference is the middle name. Police were investigating a county trustee who was giving people housing assistance checks that they didn't qualify for. They'd cash the assistance and give the trustee a percentage back. One of the civilians being investigated was the other guy. A plainclothes cop in an unmarked car shows up with a female holding a clipboard, identifies herself as a state trooper, and within 5 minutes is asking me for copies of my bank records. He's threatening to subpoena if I don't comply. This isn't the first time I've been mistaken for this guy. I used to get his mail all the time, and I even asked them if they were looking for me or the other guy, pointing out our different middle names. I got really suspicious really fast. It was a high-pressure situation demanding access to my financial records, threats to subpoena and further legal action. So I was starting to doubt whether this was an actual police officer or was in fact just a scammer. The badge he showed me was just a plastic square like my driver's license, further muddying the issue. I told him I wanted to speak with the police and called dispatch. 2 uniformed officers showed up 15 minutes later and confirmed the guy was an officer. The woman with him was some kind of auditor and record keeper. After a further 15 minutes of questions, the woman pulled the guy away and pointed out something on her phone. Yep, they wanted the other guy. I live in a neighborhood in Indiana that's going through a major revitalization right now, so it's very much in a transitional phase. We rent from a good friend of ours. He bought the house from some garbage people who'd lived there a long time ago. These people sold, and made various illegal substances. There was violence, working girls, everything. In general, the house was disgusting, unlivable really, just the worst. Well, the scumbags who lived there still try to use our address even after 5 years. About a year and a half ago, one of the guys used our address to renew his driver's license at the DMV. He even had the audacity to leave a note for us to call him when the license came in. Fast forward a few months, around Christmas time, we're all sitting around watching TV when we get a knock at the door. My husband answers it, and it's a SWAT team with weapons hot. They see my husband, who doesn't look like a crystal user or smackhead, and inside are our 2 little boys, my parents, and me nursing our baby, plus the Christmas tree and all the lovely trappings of our home. They immediately put their MP5s down, and my husband and I have a lovely chat with them. Yeah, they had our house surrounded, weapons-free, the whole shebang, looking for this one guy who was wanted on some kind of violent felony. We were angry at this guy, who I refer to as Big Nasty. Oh, this one guy who definitely went through some crap being the wrong person. A Missouri man spent nearly 17 years behind bars for robbery until his doppelganger was discovered. The other guy looked so much like him that authorities decided to toss out his conviction. Jones, who was 41, had been serving a 19-year jail sentence for a 1999 robbery when he heard other inmates buzzing that another prisoner looked just like him and even shared his first name, Starr said. It's unclear what the other person was locked up for, and Jones never saw his doppelganger, but he told 2 legal interns assigned to his case about the rumors, according to Alice Craig, one of Jones' lawyers. The interns brought the message back to their superiors at Midwest Innocence Project and the Paulie Wilson Defender Project, who dug further into the case. It turned out that not only did the other man bear an uncanny resemblance to Jones, he also lived closer to the site of the crime. Jones's doppelganger, Ricky Amos, used to live with his mother in Kansas City, Kansas, near the address of the incident, Craig said. Jones lived across the state line in Kansas City, Montana. When I saw that picture, it made sense to me, said Jones, who's denied committing the robbery to the Star. Either you're going to think we're the same person or you're going to be like, man, these guys, they look so much alike. His lawyers showed the 2 men's photos to the victim, 2 witnesses, and the prosecutor in Jones's case, and all 4 admitted they couldn't tell the pair apart, according to the Star. Okay, the narrator did a bit of digging and found out that thankfully the innocent man in question was awarded $1.1 million in damages. I'm not sure that makes up for 17 years in prison or how much went to his lawyers in the end, but I'm glad at least he got something resembling an amount that he could maybe begin rebuilding his life with. My mum had a story like this happen to her. Basically, it revolves around the show America's Most Wanted. A woman who looked almost exactly like my mum was featured on the show. She had the same hair, same face, and the kicker, the same name. They even showed my mum's actual information, which I won't list here as being the criminals. The story ended like every story on that show does. If you have any information regarding the whereabouts of this dangerous criminal, please call this number. Now, on to my mum's perspective. She was just sitting at home on a Saturday night alone, as she lived alone. She was reading a Stephen King book when she hears some commotion coming from the hallway. She ignores it. Lots of yelling. She hadn't seen the show, which painted her as a criminal. Then suddenly, bam! Her door is knocked down in an instant. About 10 cops flood into her 1-bedroom apartment and she's arrested. She explained that they had the wrong person. They claimed everything matched. Social security matched, DNA matched, name matched, photo resemblance matched. It turns out the woman was basically stealing my mum's identity and intentionally making herself look like my mum. The end result is that when they created the profile for the criminal, they used my mum's information to start with. So, when they arrested my mum, of course the information matched. It was her information originally. They kept her in jail for 2 weeks. It wasn't until they took fingerprints from the scene of the crime that they said that she'd committed and the prints didn't match that they realized she wasn't the criminal. It's scary to think that if they'd used her profile prints, rather than crime scene prints as the set to compare to, that she'd still be in jail today. It was basically a life sentence for what the other lady did. I was 16 and worked at a golf course mowing lawns and such. We got a call at home from the cops that said I was a suspect in a hit-and-run accident because my plate numbers were on the car that drove away without stopping. The cops said that the car was maroon-colored. My car was grey. We told them and figured that was that. The next day at work, there was a minor accident. An idiot coworker pulled a metal rake too hard, and the rack holding it came down onto my forehead. It wasn't a deep wound, but it bled a lot, as head wounds are wont to do. My boss took me to the ER to get my head superglued, and to be safe, took me home as well. Thus, my car stayed at the golf course. That evening, a cop came by and found me with my head wound and my car missing. I looked quite guilty. By sheer luck, the cop calls someone after talking to my parents and discovers they've got the guy and the plate numbers were just kinda close. I probably would have been arrested. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. The police stopped me once and asked me to get in the car because I fit the description of someone they were looking for, but they checked my ID and everything was cool. I asked them if they'd drop me home while I was in the car and said it'd be hilarious if they came to the front door with me to freak my mum out. She came to the door and as soon as she saw the police, her face was the angriest I've ever seen. It was hilarious. I was a curious little kid. My father stopped at the local liquor store to grab a bottle of wine and I was poking around. The door to the office was unlocked and I wandered inside, sat in the chair and spun around a few times, got bored and wandered out. A few days later, my father got a call from the police and we go in. As the officer was speaking to us, I proceeded to spin around in the chair and pick up and look at everything on his desk. After about a minute, the officer says, "Thank you for coming in. I see what happened. You can go." Turned out the owner's teenage son stole a few grand from the store and tried to blame it on the handsy 5-year-old. I did get felony stopped while on Las Vegas Boulevard. I left work, pulled out of the parking garage and turned right on Tropicana. I then saw lights behind me and started to pull over, thinking it was an emergency vehicle. I was then surrounded by police with weapons drawn. This was like midnight on the strip, so it was intense. The police made me get out and walk backwards with hands on my head. They cuff me and tear into my car almost immediately. Long story short, it was another Mustang with the out-of-state tags involved in a robbery. That was an intense evening. I was the wrong guy once. I was dating this girl, and when things didn't work out, she got vindictive. She had a copy of my car insurance and got a guy friend to pose as me to call the police and report my vehicle stolen. I go beat-bopping out of work one glorious Friday afternoon and get felony stopped by about 10 Dallas, Texas police department officers. Guns drawn on me and everything, right outside of the large office complex I worked at. Turns out the people who reported my car stolen used their own phone number when filing the report and eventually got caught and charged. I travel frequently across the Canada-US border, sometimes by bus. On one bus trip, the whole bus was held up by one woman who was pulled back to be interrogated. An hour later, she got back on the bus, announcing there was a person on the most wanted list with the same name. However, that person was a 5'4" white male, and she was a relatively tall, probably 5'10", black woman. It took them an hour of interrogating her to realize they had the wrong person. You know, I never thought the police bias against people of color was so big that they'd make this obvious of an oversight, but there you go. Don't personal files and warrants usually have a description that they could go off? Wild. Once again, not a police officer, I was on the receiving end. I'd been at a small bar listening to some live music with a friend. We left a couple of hours later, and less than a mile from the bar I got pulled over. No big deal. I pull into a circular driveway and then I got scared. No fewer than 4 police cars were surrounding us, 2 behind and 2 in front. They came to both sides and leave a number of officers at our windows while they run our licenses. See, earlier, in between sets, a lady got on stage and warned any women there not to walk home or accept rides from strangers. Apparently, there had been a number of abductions and unspeakable act offenses in the area. My friend and I ignored that warning. We weren't alone, and we were not women. Finally, the cops gave us our identification back and told us we matched the description of the offenders. Didn't say how they determined it wasn't us, but apologized and sent us on our way. It wasn't until the next day we realized just how bad that could have been. A few years ago, my husband and I were having a lazy Sunday morning, making pancakes, blasting music, having a good time. There was a really loud banging on the door. I rushed over to answer it, thinking someone must have knocked multiple times before we had even heard, and opened it up to 4 police officers who pushed into our kitchen. 2 of them grabbed my husband and started telling him that he's being placed under arrest for a hit-and-run accident that took place in a city almost 2 hours away. Freaking out, my husband explains to the police that he was at work all night and he's just got home an hour before that. He must have been really convincing because 2 officers sat at our kitchen table with us, while 2 others went outside to call my husband's workplace to confirm his story. Turns out a car that we'd sold about a year before that was involved in an accident that hit 3 parked cars and a woman the night prior. Luckily, she only had minor injuries. But the driver was nowhere to be found. There was a clear video of our old car smashing into parked cars, hitting a pedestrian, and the man jumping out of it shortly afterwards. When the police found the abandoned car and ran the VIN, it led them to our house. In Ontario, when you sell a vehicle, you're supposed to bring a slip into the Service Ontario Centre to prove that the ownership has been transferred, but it's not really enforced and there's no penalties for not doing it, because the person purchasing the vehicle needs to do the same, to get plates, stickers and insurance, stuff like that. Obviously and stupidly, we didn't do the stuff on our end. The cops came back in, apologized for the mistake, gave us a half-hearted lecture about properly switching ownerships, and left. The jerk that was actually driving the car was caught the next day. An officer called my husband to tell him and made a joke about us having to pay any impound fees. I was the guy. Got pulled over a block from a local McDonald's. The officer explains that he got a report that the manager at McDonald's reported that a guy about my description had tried to grab the cash drawer from the register when she opened it to make a change for him. When she resisted, he fled in a yellow Ford LTD. I happened to be driving a Ford LTD. I told him I wasn't the guy, asked if the name of the manager who reported it was Tina. Yep. Well, then she would have told you my name when reporting the attempted robbery if I was the culprit. I'd been working there as a manager for about 2 years, and she'd definitely have recognized me. He agreed that I was unlikely to be the culprit. I immediately drove over to find out what had happened from Tina. Evidently, she had went on aggro when the guy tried to grab the door and just grabbed both his hands and dug her nails into the top of his hands. Evidently, it was all the guy could do to tear himself away and flee. Tina may have weighed about 100 pounds soaking wet. I'm in a class called Wildlife Law Enforcement, which is taught by a game warden. Wardens have police powers and can be called in if backup is needed. My teacher is a great guy and loves stories. Anyway, my local police force has a way of capturing people with outstanding warrants that may or not be common. What they do is send a letter to the perp saying that they won a prize from the city. Apparently, however they deliver this makes it seem very legit. To receive your prize, you have to go to the community center at a certain date and time, then the police get you to sign after you sign in for your prize. So in my city, they set this up and sent a letter to a particular man with a very recognizable name. The day of the prize claiming, this very large old man comes in and is soon fighting against 3 officers in this community center claiming. He fought pretty damn hard thinking he was being jumped, but of course got cuffed and stuffed in the back of a squad car. The issue? They didn't check the important details of age. They captured senior when junior was the one with the warrant. They assumed because of this man's very recognizable name that there could only be one. I remember when my son was 3 weeks old. It was 3 a.m. and I was laying down on the couch. Baby is in his rocker. Suddenly there's a loud knocking on my door followed by, "Police!" I thought for sure it was my friends coming home from the bar and they needed a place to crash, and they've done that police knock to me before. So I was just sitting there mad thinking, don't they know I have a kid now? Needless to say, I didn't answer the door, figured they'd find somewhere else. Next thing I know, my door was kicked down, I grabbed the baby and ran towards the door, and 4 or 5 police officers run in. They searched my house with flashlights, scared the crap out of my sleeping husband. My 5-year-old didn't wake up though. Turns out they had the wrong address. They apologized and a week later they installed a new door for me. But holy crap was that scary. There's something endlessly hilarious about a very serious and gung-ho police squad going into a house in action movie mode, then sheepishly having to walk out again apologizing. I know it must be super scary for the homeowner, but my goodness, it's a great second-hand thing to laugh about. One night around 8 p.m, my fiancé received a call. The officer calling said, "Derek, we have your health card. Tell us your whereabouts right now." My fiancé answered, "This isn't Derek." "You sound like Derek. Your buddies ratted you out and gave us your number. Now where are you?" "I'm not Derek and I'm not telling you where I am. Who are you?" "This is Officer Smith. Stop messing around and tell us your location, Derek." "Again, Derek is not my name. How do I know you're a real officer?" "Boy, if you don't tell me where you are, you're going to be in much more trouble. My badge number is," and gives a number. "Okay, fine, I'm at home at," and he gives our address. "If you don't show up in a police car, I'm not coming out." He hung up the phone, dialed 911 because we live in a bad area and weren't sure if this was a fake call or not. The operator verifies it was a correct badge number. The officer called back. He apparently misdialed by 1 number. He apologized but still blamed my fiancé because "you were being very defensive and sounded guilty." This one sort of fits. I used to work an AWOL section in the army where we'd collect soldiers that were AWOL from various jails and process them. One time we got paperwork for a guy that was supposedly AWOL since the Korean War. Both me and the LA officers had no idea what to make of it. The guy was old, I don't remember exactly how old, and obviously the paperwork we had from his enlistment was outdated, and impossible to tell from the picture if it was him or not. I mean, it was 50 years prior. The person in custody was saying he was never in the army and that it was a mistaken identity. He was Korean, and his name, particularly his last name, was not at all that unique. I think Kim, Lee, and Park account for something like 60% of South Korean last names. Socials weren't used as ID numbers back then, so we couldn't use that. We ended up just letting him go because A, we had no way to tell if it was even the right guy or not, and B, we weren't going to send a 70-year-old guy to get dishonorable discharged. Still no idea if this was the right guy. Gentlemen, what made you nope out before the second date? We went to her place and her pets and plants were all dead. I saw goldfish floating upside down in a fish tank, and she had a dead hamster in a cage on her dining room table. She said, "Yeah, that happens a lot." And all I'm imagining is hamster after hamster starving to death right in front of her. The word sociopath floated into my mind. I made some excuses to leave, and she went a bit nuts at that point, which concerned me quite a bit, but at least I'd already figured her head was seriously spun. She rolled her eyes when I said she looked nice, she'd clearly put in a lot of effort, criticized where I chose to eat, complained about the music we went to see. I spent the whole date anxious, assuming that she was hating every moment. Because, she didn't have anything positive to say about anything. And then she said, "I had a good time, let's do this again." Nah, I'm good. I've got enough negativity and mixed signals coming from my own brain. I don't need it coming from the outside too. Oh god, she's a complainer, just like my mom. She always manages to find something to complain about even when the situation gets better. I try not to be like her on dates. It seems that when people are constantly complaining, they literally have nothing to contribute. I went on a date with a lady I met online. She talked about 3 things on this date and little else: her pets, her ex, and the last time she had gastroenteritis. There was no second date. Went to dinner, she was on her phone the entire time texting, even when we were talking. Figured she was just in it for the free dinner, cause really, what's the point of agreeing to a date if you're not going to try to get to know the person? That's when you put down cash for your half of the bill and walk out. Frick that. What that person has just suggested is a real power move. I'm not sure that I could ever work up the nerve to do it myself, but honestly, people who behave like that date probably deserve it. What complaints can they make? Having to pay for their own share? There's maybe some nuance to it. I mean, like if your date seems nice but you're just not interested or feeling the connection, then maybe pay for the bill. If they are behaving like an absolute jerk, pay your part and bail. So, I'm not proud of this one, but I'll share. Years ago, when I was still single, I met someone online. We chatted for a bit and she seemed cool enough, and we decided to meet up for a burger at a place I knew downtown. Seemed like a kind of low-key thing. I got into the bar a few minutes early and ordered a beer, then finished it. Then, 45 minutes late, she rolls in. First, okay, cool, we have jobs and we deal with traffic or whatever, but no excuse, just a shrug and, "That's how it goes sometimes." She sat down and we began chit-chatting. She asked about my work. I assumed it was a regular nervous bit of small talk. 2, but no, it was trying to feel out how much money I made. And 3, when she asked my job title and I told her, she immediately suggested that we leave this casual pub place to hit up a wine bar down the block. Okay, I guess. It's a little more upscale than I had in mind, but okay. We walk there, get seated, and then come the menus. 4, she ordered herself dinner. Some kind of seafood thing that cost an insane amount of money. And a bottle of wine. Not a glass, mind you. A $250 fricking bottle of wine. I'd already ordered a drink from the bar for myself, and I got the impression that this was not wine to share. She kept talking about how much her job sucked and how little it paid, and how no one at her work was fun to hang out with. Like the only conversation she had was bashing work and co-workers, with a few mildly racist undertones. 6. The whole time she was texting friends to meet up that evening. I was invited, of course, to party with them all night, and I assume to bankroll their fun. I discreetly went up to the bar, paid for my drink, and just left. I straight up noped out of there without so much as a goodbye. From my messages when I checked in online later, I know that I stuck her with an almost $500 bill and that she was going to sue me for it. Heard from the wine bar owner later, it was close to work and sometimes a happy hour spot for me, that she had apparently tried to skip out on the bill, but they stopped her and she paid. By the way, my very next date was with the woman I eventually married. That one went much, much better. She had a 1-year-old and told me about a recent nasty divorce. No problem until she told me that the divorce was due to the baby not being his. I drove her home because she didn't have a car at the time and she asked we stop for an errand. To pick up matching t-shirts she had designed for her and her ex. She said, "I can't wait for you to meet my older brother. He just got out of jail for selling smack." I said, "Didn't you just tell me that your younger brother was addicted to smack?" "Oh yeah, I wondered how that happened." Frick this crap, I'm out. When we saw Fury in theaters, she read the subtitles out loud. I'm not sure if she thought I couldn't read them or if she needed to sound them out, but I knew at that moment no follow-up was necessary. I arrived at her place and she told me to hop in her car as she just needed to drop something off at a friend's house real quick. It wasn't a friend. It was someone she had an appointment to sell those hot oil infusers and their millions of scented inserts to. I sat in a stranger's home for 90 minutes while they smelled them all. She wanted to go to dinner afterwards, and I asked her to please drop me off at the car so I could go home. She didn't think this was cool of me as she had a business to run. I guess I didn't even make it a whole first date. I went for a meal with this girl I met through a dating app, and it was going really well. We started talking about movies and then we decided to go to the cinema to watch Inception. She said there was a cinema nearby, but I didn't know the area at all, so I used the GPS on my phone and she held it and directed me. Once we got there, we started walking inside and I realized I didn't have my phone in my pocket. I said I must have left it in the car and started to walk back to get it. She was trying to get me to leave it and saying we'd missed the film, but the phone was only about a week old, so I was really paranoid about it. We checked the car for about 10 minutes, but we couldn't find it. I asked her to check her jacket and bag, but she said it wasn't there. A couple parked next to us, so I asked them to ring my number because I couldn't find it. It started to ring, and it was obviously coming from my date's handbag. She took it out and said she must have missed it. I thanked the couple and locked my car, and as I turned back around, she was walking the other way. I ran to catch up and asked what was going on, but she was very dismissive and was barely talking. That's when I realized it probably wasn't an accident and just left her to walk home alone. She forgot to take off her wedding ring at the second date. She asked if I had any love interests still in existence. When I said no, she said she didn't believe me. She told me she wanted to travel the world and see old friends, who all seemed to be guys, and thought that I, as a lawyer, should work and pay for her travels. She was insane. She also offered to do the deed in her car in the first 5 minutes of meeting. No second date for you. When she said, "I'm so glad my fiancé is still deployed," I noped out and left her with the bill for that dinner. You know, say what you will about these people, at least they're open about what they're doing. Maybe they're making sure at least these men they're meeting are aware? I don't know whether that's honorable, but it's sure preferable to leading 6 months of a delusioned but happy relationship and then getting absolutely mauled by an angry Navy SEAL coming off their tour. So, thank you, honest cheaters. Teeth as black as the night. She didn't have any diseases or syndromes, but simply no time to brush her teeth. For the record, her photos didn't show her teeth. If I ask you a question or try to talk, please reciprocate. I hate that I feel like I'm supposed to use up an arsenal of questions that will only get a brief response in return. I met her at a hospital. I was an ER patient for a hand wound and she was a phlebotomist. I asked her out to a movie and then dinner. We had a really excellent talk about comics and movies. We were getting to know each other and flirting. It was clearly a date. At the end, when I told her I'd like to do it again, she said her fiancé probably wouldn't be cool with it a second time. Here's a text conversation we had the day after the second time we went out. First time we hit a couple of bars, so we were drinking, which probably made it more bearable. Decided to give her a second shot with a beach date, but it sucked. Pretty much, she was just very negative and argumentative about almost anything I said. So I said, "Hey, thanks for driving yesterday. Anyway, I don't just want to ghost anyone because that's pretty mean, but I don't think we really click. Good luck with your move." She was moving apartments that week. Shoot. I should have guessed this was coming after how off yesterday felt. I appreciate your honesty. I know I poked you too much with the fishing comments, but were there other things I did that were really off-putting? I'd like to know so I don't keep doing them. I responded 2 days later because I was actually really freaking busy. "Sorry dude, work has been crazy busy this week, so I haven't really been on my phone. Mainly, I think we have different values and worldviews, and our differing personalities didn't allow us to get past those or discuss. Kinda seemed like a lot of the things I brought up led to negative responses, which makes it harder for self-disclosure and leaves the conversation at small talk and prevents any kind of connection. Don't take this as an attack, because I think at the root of it all, we just have different clashing personalities and never really found any common ground. Maybe I'm just being sensitive, but I did feel like there wasn't much willingness to understand my interests or values and a lack of agreeableness from you. So it felt as if I was being almost disparaged for my values and worldview. I like fishing and hunting, and she was a high-horsed vegan type. Okay, thank you for the thoughtful feedback. You're right that we have different worldviews, but I was close-minded in my approach to getting to know you and making you feel welcome. I definitely came off judgmental and bitter on Sunday, and I appreciate you explaining how that made you close off. Thanks again for taking the time to explain and for giving me a shot in the first place. Wow, that was so mature. You don't see that often enough. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I met a girl from my university for dinner one time, and she started the date off by saying she only ate with her hands and didn't use utensils because she's a super taster and can taste the metals they're made of. This wouldn't have been a problem if we were eating finger foods, of course, but it was a problem as I watched her eat a salmon fillet and wild rice like fricking Gollum. And to head off some comments I'm getting, she's not Filipina or of Asian descent. According to her Facebook, she's German/Italian, and I know those people use forks. The girl I met claimed that she was seeing other guys just to use them for free drinks, their pool, or their car was nice. I noped out of there real quick. 6 years ago, I went out with a girl who called me a racist because I don't like sushi. She chewed gum through our initial date, which was at a decent Italian place, including a bottle of good white wine. And she proceeded to tell me how she had married early, had 2 kids, girls, realized she was a lesbian, left her husband and took most of his money, lived with girlfriend number 1, left girlfriend number 1 for number 2, ended that, and then realized that long-term she needed an eggplant. I noped the frick out of there so fast. She never asked a single question about me. So frustrating. First, suggested we go to the nicest steakhouse in town. Then, when I assumed we'd go Dutch or pay for our own stuff, she assumed I was paying because she's, quote, just old-fashioned. Then asked me what my debt-to-income ratio was, and finally, upon learning I'd paid off my student loans, demanded that I pay hers off if I wanted a second date. I drove us to the venue, but I just drove home by myself after paying the bill. Go fudge yourself, Erin, you cheap witch. You see, gentlemen, one of the wonderful things about feminism is that we don't have to submit to the traditional mindset about dates, and while some of us do offer to pay for our dates, we're not legally obliged. The world of more equal dating with empowered, independent women has many perks, despite what certain people say. Enjoy it. First and only date with a girl I barely knew through some friends. I drove to her house, she got in my car, and smelled like she'd just dropped a massive turd but forgot to wipe. Went to dinner, I barely ate. Made an excuse to end early, dropped her off, and drove home with the windows down in the middle of winter. Pregnant, but no worries, the father is locked up. I was 32, she was 35. She showed up to dinner high as a kite. Dropped the C word several times, loud enough for people around us to hear. She then got loaded during dinner, ordered an expensive plate and barely touched it. She also told me I'm stupid for still buying books and childish for listening to music. She also insisted I had to take her out 2 to 3 times a week minimum. It was also implied she'd be moving in with me in the near future. She was unemployed and living at home, which honestly didn't bother me. The whole jumping into the deep end thing did. 20 minutes into the date, I text my friend, "Holy crap, turns out she's awful." She didn't say anything. Like, there's being nervous and then there's that. We were taking a film class together in school and agreed to go see a movie together, paying 50-50, that counted for extra credit. It became clear a few days beforehand that this was turning into a full-on date, and I just rolled with it. We were both single and I thought we could have a fun night out together. I asked if we could get dinner after the movie to talk about it and get to know each other better. She seemed excited by the idea and I was looking forward to the night. I picked her up and she was dead silent. She was dressed to the nines for a casual date and was clearly nervous. I did my best to break the ice and run the conversation, and the best I could get out of her was a nervous chuckle and, yep. After the movie, I asked if she still wanted dinner, and she said absolutely. and then proceeded to watch me eat dinner while she stared at me. When I dropped her off at home, she told me she had a really nice time and hoped we could hang out outside of class again. I told her for sure, and we said goodnight. She flat out never said another word to me in class again. A year or so later, I ran into her at a party and asked her what the whole deal was about. She confessed she was so gosh darn anxious that she had no clue what to do or say. Apparently that was the first date she'd ever been on with a guy. It's a shame too, because in class we got along really well. I was just so put off by the silence that I didn't know how to approach her for the rest of the semester. Apparently she's a semi-professional golfer now. I haven't heard from her in years, but I hope she's doing well out there. She chewed her food with her mouth open. Always kills me. Went for a walk in the woods. She walked about 5 feet ahead of me the whole time. Would think she was nervous about walking alone in the woods with a guy she didn't know, but she's the one that suggested a walk. I don't know. It was weird. She didn't even bring her wallet to the restaurant. I would have offered and obviously ended up paying, but that level of presumptuousness was an immediate turn-off. She showed up in a dirty white dress. Her hair looked like it hadn't been brushed in months. During dinner, she told me that she still lived at home, never wanted to get a job, and that she stole her dad's car while he was asleep to meet me at the restaurant. Then when she found out I was divorced, she said, "You didn't work hard enough to save your marriage." That hurt. She had no idea what I'd been through. I put down the chopsticks, went and paid, and said nice meeting you, and left. She said, "So you're a mathematician. Is it true all mathematicians are virgins?" Statistically, no. Also, goodbye. We went out for coffee. She bought a bottle of vodka and kept topping up her cup. I politely asked her what the deal was, and she said she liked to party. When it was time to go, she fell over and started screaming that I had to help her up. I did. I told her to wait right there and left. She didn't even fricking share the vodka. Well, you should have at least called a taxi. I'm going to say that I don't completely agree with your actions. Nonetheless, funny story, smooth exit, thank you for sharing. She was part of a multi-level marketing scheme like Beachbody or something. The list goes on, but that was the big no-no for me. Went out with a nice girl with similar interests, but the entire time I kept looking at her teeth and cursing my sensitive nose because I could smell her rank breath when she talked and really couldn't focus on anything else. Tinder date. She, quote, forgot to mention that she had a boyfriend. I became suspicious when I saw the background of her phone. It was a picture of her kissing with a man. When I asked her about that picture, she told me it was her boyfriend. The reason she was doing this was because her boyfriend was boring. She couldn't answer when I asked her why she didn't break up with him in the first place. Told her what she was doing wasn't cool and that she needs to be honest to her boyfriend, and I ended the date shortly after. So I take this girl out to a bar and restaurant, meeting her for the first time after talking on an online dating site. After she orders her food, she drops the bomb. She tells me for the past 7 years she's been a word that we can't say on YouTube, so let's just say it's the kind of dungeon master that has nothing to do with tabletop role-playing games. So I'm an open-minded guy. I'm cool with this. She probably has some funny stories, right? Well, she starts telling me these stories, and for the first half hour or so, they are pretty entertaining. Eventually, though, I want to talk about other things. However, anytime I try to change the subject, she immediately brings it back to dudes she's gone number 2 on. It got weird. I could barely get a word in. She basically didn't take a breath for 3 hours. Again, I'm a really open-minded guy, but there's only so many consecutive stories of gags and double-sided butt toy use a person can take before even the most open-minded amongst us starts to feel uncomfortable. At one point, I excuse myself to go to the bathroom. As I stand up and turn around, she seizes this chance to smack my butt and says, "Your butt looks like a baby pumpkin. I could bounce a quarter off it and get back 2 dimes and a nickel." Keep in mind, this lady is a professional. It was crisp and painful. To put this in perspective, I was wearing thick black jeans. She hit me in the back pocket, so a double layer of denim, and when I checked myself for the damage in the bathroom, it was a clear, fat red handprint on my butt cheek. Like I could see the lines in her hand. I could have mooned a psychic and they would have been able to predict her future. So I'm about done with this. We finish the meal and I drive her home while she still blabs tales of donkey tail butt toys and things I've never heard of, going into places I wish I hadn't heard of. So I pull into her driveway, and the second the car goes into park, she immediately grabs my family jewels, like specifically targets them. And it wasn't hot, it was a hostage situation where she had all the power. Then she straight up licks the side of my face, chin to hairline, her tongue as big as a Shetland pony. I do not want. Then she looks me in the eyes and says menacingly, "I'm gonna strap you into my dungeon." The frick you are, I choose life. I think to myself, how do I get out of this? She literally has me by the stones here. So here's what I come up with. I tell her, hell yeah, let's do it. I have a special toy I keep in my trunk, is that okay? She says, sure, bring any toys you want. So I tell her to meet me at her doorstep while I bust it out because I want it to be a surprise. As she steps out of the car, she gives me a look that she thinks is hot, but is actually terrifying. The second her feet touch the ground, I slam the car into reverse and fly out of her driveway as fast as my car can go. You know how most people pull out of a driveway, switch to drive, and then drive off ahead? I didn't do that. I didn't want 1 second of switching gears to give her the chance to catch me. I pulled out of the driveway and just kept going down the street in reverse for about 5 blocks. The passenger door was flapping around, still open, because I took off before she shut it. When I'm satisfied that she won't catch me, I close the door, put it in drive, and go home. Gotta get back on that horse, right? Wrong. I got home, iced my sack, and deleted my online profile. Not today, Satan. How did you see an idiot completely blow all of their money? Well, the accountant at the small business I work at does a lot of funny things with money. Has a perfectly good, paid-off car, but it was slightly too old to drive for Uber to make extra money, so she got a lease on a brand new car through Uber. After a month, she found out she wasn't making enough extra money from Uber to even pay the lease, and her commute was too far to drive the Uber car to work and back because they limit the miles. After she weaseled out of her Uber lease, she decided she needed a brand new Harley that she had no idea how to drive. This was over a year ago. She's ridden it exactly once around her neighborhood. She'll be paying for this motorcycle for another 4 years at least. She took out a second mortgage on her home to fix up to get ready to sell, and she's so happy with the remodel that she's keeping the house. She's a single mother twice over, and is always telling us how some nice man from her church paid for her daughter's school trip or whatever. She is the dumbest person I've ever met, and I'm always a little freaked out that she's handling our money. Guy I know won 10 grand. They then spent that 10 grand trying to win again. One of my coworkers bought a new car because, wait for it, she couldn't afford to put tires on her current one. This one just hurts. It hurts my brain. People only see the payments, not the cost. My boyfriend's friend's wife just did that with her Prius. She traded in her Prius that was a few years old for a brand new one because the old one needed tires and it would be the same monthly, except longer, and now they owe more than it's worth. Blew my mind when my boyfriend told me that story because the friend didn't seem that stupid and neither did the wife. Friend got $150K in life insurance from her mum passing away. It was gone in a year. She paid a $20K bail for her boyfriend. At the end of that year, he was also gone. She works at Popeyes now. God damn. I'm no financial genius, but at least I feel like when you get a gift like that, you have to put it into your house or something to help yourself out long term. Buy yourself 1 or 2 nice things, sure, but that's too much money to be an idiot with. Divorce. Growing up, we were good friends with a family that made it big with buying and selling airplane parts pre-internet. The couple went through a nasty divorce that got strung out over a 6-year period. The wife was 100% convinced through her crapbag lawyers that her husband had funneled money into secret accounts. He hadn't, and she wasn't happy with his initial offer, which was the mansion, half the multi-millions, and $5 grand a month for child support alone. The court proceedings went on for years, and at the end of it all, they pretty much had nothing due to court fees and lawyer fees. His business failed because of how unstable air travel became after September 11th. If she had just split things and taken that mansion and the other payments, she would have gotten $4.2 million from the divorce, not having worked a day in her life. In short, divorce is one hell of a substance. I have an idiot friend who's getting something like 30% of his wages garnished. Why? Because he forgot to pay his student loan. He's crap at paying bills, and it's not because he doesn't make the money for it. He has a decent job. He just literally ignores paper mail and emails reminding him and then eventually demanding him to pay off things like credit card bills and his student loans. If he does bother to read them, it literally goes in one ear and out the other, just slides right out of his mind. After a few months, he'll remember, log into his account, pay the payment in full with accrued interest, and then just shrug it off like it's normal. Somehow, he forgot to pay his student loans for something like a year, and it went to collections. I told him he could even set up automatic payments for that crap, and he agrees it's a good idea. And then he just never does it. I offered to set it up for him, and it's always, later. A friend at 37 who had never worked any job that paid above minimum wage inherited tons of money from his father. Despite having absolutely no experience in any of those positions or even how to run or manage a business, he decided to open up a restaurant which was a disaster from day one and closed down not long afterward. Then decided to get into photography, threw away tons of money on super fancy equipment he had absolutely no idea what it was or how to use, and never made a penny. Tried to start a DJ business. No bite. Disappeared off the face of the earth right afterwards. My brother-in-law brought a used BMW for 15 grand with a credit card at 26% APR. This is the winner.
Actually, I think you'll find the bank is the winner.
Yes, he's the definition of financial irresponsibility. He used to buy Gucci belts and Armani shirts. Now that he has 2 young children, that's stopped and he's driving a beat-up Trailblazer. He's 42 now, lives in a bedroom he rents from my in-laws with his 2 kids and wife, and is working 2 jobs to get by. It's sad, especially for my 2 nieces, but I feel little sympathy for him because for years I lectured him about being financially responsible, but he cared less about that than the image of having money that he put out. My friend, whom I love dearly, has been driving me pretty insane. Her parents are terrible with their money, and she's been complaining for ages about how inconsiderate and irresponsible they are. How they infuriate her because they buy things they don't actually need with the reasoning of, well, it'll make us or someone else happy, so what's the problem? She calls me a month or so ago because thanks to her parents and their irrational spending habits and irresponsibility, she may not be able to finish school. She doesn't know how she'll manage to eat or afford anything she needs, and she can't get a full-time job right now either. So, she and her boyfriend, who she's breaking up with soon, decide that instead of saving their very limited money and using it wisely, they'd impulsively buy 2 puppies. I don't know the breed, but they'll be huge dogs when they grow up. They brought them from a sketchy stranger on Facebook who they don't know and who charged them hundreds of dollars for the pups. Her reasoning for getting them when she knows she can't afford them?
They'll make me happy, so it'll help with the stress of not having any money.
I'm still enraged, honestly. The hypocrisy, irresponsibility, and impulsivity is maddening. My friend is basically a 37-year-old child with a good salary. One month his water bill was $700. He asked me if I thought it was because his sink faucet was dripping. I said it sounded more like a broken pipe. He never found out the issue, he just paid the bill and said, oh well. A guy I worked with was always complaining that he was poor, although later I found out that this was solely due to bad budgeting and impulse spending. He was really good at his job, so I suggested that he do some freelance IT security consulting on the side. He did a job for a high-end jeweler which paid him about $2,000 for 2 days' work. He was ecstatic that he finally had enough money to fix all the problems he'd been putting off for ages, like the oil leak on his car, a new pair of work shoes, and getting his boiler fixed. At the end of the job, he was leaving the retailers with cash in hand when he spotted a high-end watch in a display case, which was $2,000 down from $3,500 or so. Unable to pass up such a bargain, he handed the $2,000 right back over and walked out with the watch. 2 days later, he was complaining because his fridge was empty. My response was, at least you can use the watch to time how long it takes you to starve. Pay their current vehicle off with savings, then immediately trade in that car and get a car worth a lot more, only to be back in deeper debt with less in their savings. This person made a lot of other stupid choices, but that's a different story. Every once in a while, my stepdad will calculate how much money he could save by quitting drinking, then decides to quit and starts spending like he has that money. And spoiler alert, he doesn't actually quit. This is the closest the narrator feels he's come to any of these. Not the drinking part, but deciding that because you've saved on something, you're entitled to spend it on something else. Dumb as all hell. And then some unexpected emergency cost comes along and knocks you further down the hole. Grew up fairly wealthy, went to a private school with lots of other wealthy kids. Knew one girl who had two wealthy parents pass away when she was young and lived with an uncle. She was messed up as a kid, really wild, always the first to try everything, in her own way incredibly sweet, and always protected the less popular kids. Anyway, she hit 21, got a huge trust fund. Her uncle put up a fight for the money because he knew she was going to go nuts with it. It wasn't for the cash, he had much more than her. Ultimately, he lost and she got everything. It was the beginning of the end for her. She blew through the massive wealth in 2 years, doing untold amounts of white snow, binge drinking, trips to crazy places, constantly surrounded by people using her for party money. We're talking millions of dollars here. Not a cent invested anywhere. Anyways, 2 years later, she's back with her uncle, not a penny to her name. He loves her, so of course he takes her in. Everyone who was hanging out with her for the past 2 years is gone. Everyone laughs at her behind her back. A few hospital instances where she took too many substances left her a little slow. She tries school, but it doesn't work. Her uncle gave her a quote, job, but it's a token thing. At least she's lucky enough that she had someone to look after her in the end. My sister-in-law had a kiosk at the mall that didn't make that much money. She doesn't have another job except Uber sometimes. She has 2 kids and always takes them to eat out and buy stuff that costs beyond her means. She lives with my mother-in-law and pays next to nothing for rent, so there's really no excuse. She refuses to even slightly thrift on her kids' clothes and constantly buys them stuff like Lacoste and Ralph Lauren because image is apparently everything. Her oldest just started kindergarten this year. He plays soccer too, so she splurged on the high-end equipment, and he's not really even that into the sport. Anyway, his teacher said that in her 25 years of teaching, this was the first time she was ever instructed by a parent to make sure their kid changed his shoes before PE. I just got the news this morning that she lost the kiosk yesterday. Too many fines for showing up late to open and bringing her youngest to work with her, so they shut her down. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My friend started up a gaming store, like for tabletop games, Magic the Gathering, D&D, gaming figurines, among other things. He mistakenly thought that because he was so interested in the material, it would be easy for him to jump into. He has no business acumen and has never owned a business in the past. He never had a lot of money, he always rented and was always behind bills, had child support and kids to pay for, though he was really good at penny pinching and saving money. But that was only half the equation. He ended up borrowing a bunch of cash from his new wife. He set up his store location in a small town that's rather out of the way, a bad location. He claimed the store was only temporary and was supposed to be a storage site so he could ship items sold off the internet. Thus, he never got much traffic and therefore very few sales. However, it was a source of contention between him and his wife. He had confided in me that his store was ultimately a reason to get out of the house and away from the family, which is not really a good reason to throw money into a business. He and his wife ended up divorcing. He decided to quit the store. He ended up with a ton of merchandise, packing his meager apartment that he'd been trying to sell. Worst of all, he apparently didn't keep his books. He's apparently somewhere around $50,000 in tax debt to the state and increasing with fines. I find this astounding because there's no way he had enough money to justify that much in taxes in the period he owned and operated the store. I wonder if something else was afoot. I gave my brother a step-by-step plan to cover his rent, keep his job, fill up his car, and pay me back within a 1-week period. He was tight on money. I found him at Foot Locker with a large bag 2 hours later.
That must have hurt.
Yep, 2 pairs of Nikes forcibly shoved up someone's butt would hurt quite a bit. I used to work in a bank offering investment and lending advice, car loans, mortgages, retirement savings, that sort of thing. I had a client who was a successful lawyer, and his father was a very successful lawyer. He married a successful lawyer. They made a lot of money, easily over $1 million each, so $2 million per year gross household income. Every week they had 0 money left. I tried to help by setting up an automatic contribution to a savings account. If they don't see it, maybe they won't spend it. Nope, they spent it. Every week they'd call me to transfer the money out of their savings and into their checking account. So I sat down with them and went over their budget. They didn't have one. They had no concept of what things cost. They didn't have a firm grasp of how much they made or how much they spent. They bought impulsively and recklessly. The Dodge Viper was a big thing at the time, so he went out and bought one and financed it. He didn't have the space for it, so he rented space to store it. He never drove it. He had it customized with expensive aftermarket stuff. It was a work of art. I don't know if he ever drove it at all. He had no interest in showing it or anything. It was a money pit. She had never cut her own finger or toenails in her life. Her whole life she had just gone for a weekly mani-pedi. More frequently if she chipped a nail or something. She shopped, like a lot. She always looked amazing. They were very smart people but had grown up with money and had no concept of it. Like it would always just be there. I tried to help them budget, but that means deciding to go with something or delaying a purchase, and they'd never done it before, so why start now? I left the bank and they were still going week to week. Wonderful people, but just no concept of money. Me, when I was 18 years old and applied for credit. 10 years later, I finally finished paying off those damn cards. I knew a guy that bought a Trans Am, fully loaded and had a $700 payment in 1985. That's like $1,650 today. He ended up bankrupt. Another guy I knew told me he was going to declare bankruptcy for over $4,000 debt about 25 years ago. We were riding in his late model truck and I said, "Why don't you sell the truck, settle the debt and save up for a new one?" He got furious and yelled at me for saying that. He ended up bankrupt and still lost the truck. I bet holding the "I told you so" gave our author an actual aneurysm, because it sure as crap just gave me a headache just reading about this from a random dude on the internet 25 years after the fact. My friend. When I met her, I thought she was so financially stable and responsible. She wanted to spend a day shopping for more conservative clothes to go visit family out of state. We tagged along and had a great time. She spent close to $1,000 on new clothes and taking us out to dinner that day. I've since learned that she has zero ability to budget, frequently can't make rent, and basically can't take care of herself. Opens a store credit card every time she's offered because the more lines of credit you have open, the better. She has about 50 credit cards open. Well, that's anxiety-inducing, and I don't even know the girl. I have a friend who's 40 years old, single, lives by himself, and will buy green herb as a priority over some of his bills. Every 2 to 3 months, I'll get a call asking for a bailout. He's also on Social Security and lives in a subsidized apartment and pays $120 for rent. It's very, very frustrating to get those calls for help. I went to community college my first year. I knew this guy that was from a super low-income family and he received massive amounts of student loans. He blew it all on a used car, wheels, and a sound system. I tried to tell him it was a loan and not a grant. He disagreed. I lost touch with him a year or two later, but he has to be underwater in debt. College friend graduated with over $100K in private student loans. The bank offered a $5K credit towards the loans as a graduation gift, or $1.5 grand in cash. Guess which one they took and used as a down payment on a new car. For clarification, this was a new car to replace the perfectly good used car they already had, and they didn't get into a lucrative career. Last I heard, they were working food service. I have a colleague in her mid-50s who's divorced with no kids. She's the sole means of her own financial support. There's no parents or siblings to fall back on. She lives alone in an apartment. She recently took out her student debt consolidation loan. As soon as she gets those credit cards maxed out, she takes out a loan, pays the cards off, and runs them up again. I'd feel sorry for her if the charges were for general living expenses, but they're not. They're for highlights in her hair, manicures, trips to the Caribbean with boyfriend du jour, those cute sandals that she'll wear twice before replacing them with cuter sandals, high-end everything, makeup, perfume, and clothing. Once in a while, she'll lament about her $40K in loans and the fact that she's literally 2 paychecks from being homeless, and I'll gently point out that less trips to the salons and the islands might put her in a better financial position. I work hard and deserve nice things. I deserve vacations. I deserve to feel good and look good. Don't tell me how to spend my money. This coming from a woman who has to pay for her lunch with a credit card the day before payday because she's overdrawn on her checking account. I've seen her do this, and she explained why she was doing it. She refuses to believe that she's the cause of her own financial difficulties. I know someone that will refuse to work a regular job, lives off the women in his life, doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together at 52 years old, and complains constantly about how everything is rigged to keep him from succeeding. One of my old friends was living paycheck to paycheck, less than that some months. She was eating food from work for breakfast, which was one of those ice cream places. When I was asking her about her finances to see if she could cut back something, she mentioned that she smoked recreational green herb every day, several times a day, but she said, "It's only a hobby, I could stop it at any time." However, she refused to stop it when I told her it was a possible avenue to cut back on if she wanted to comfortably make her bills. It got kind of tiresome to constantly hear about how she had no money for food. My friend had saved up about $8K and was planning to use it to down a new car. Instead, his parents forced him to use that money to buy his little brother a used car. The younger brother is the spoiled golden child who's supposed to lift the family out of poverty. The older brother, my friend, is the kind-hearted but apparently dumb one who had to drop out of school to work and help the family. It was pretty easy for them to force his hand in helping to buy the car. Rather than buying something cheap and reliable like a Camry, the dumb little brother goes full JDM and buys a crappy, overpriced Nissan Silvia. The car still needed work, and the idiot didn't even know how to work on cars. When I found out what happened, I was freaking livid. I know how hard my friend had worked to save up that money. What's worse is that the younger brother crashed the car a few months later, and it just sat in front of their house for almost a year before they sold it off for dimes. Not the worst, but I had a strong lesson about money management. I was 11 or something. Hitman Blood Money just came out. I was hyped. I loved that series, so I started to save money right away. I was saving by walking home instead of taking a bus. I was saving by not eating candy or drinking soda. I was really close. But one day as I was walking home, I saw my cousin. He was holding an RC car, brand new. I asked about it and he said he won it with luck. He told me there's a game in the market near us. I was amazed. So you can pay $1 and spin the wheel? I wanted to try that game, and I wanted to win. I said to myself, "Okay, John, just 2 to 3 games." I went there and spun the wheel. And then I spun it again and again. I lost, but I still had a lot of money, right? When I realized I'd blown most of my Hitman money, I was determined more than sad. I wasn't going to afford Hitman, but I still had a chance for that car, so I spun again. Reality set in when I was sitting on the curb with a bag full of crappy candy and plastic vampire teeth. I lost everything I made in 1 month over 1 hour. I learned a hard lesson early. So I'm really grateful, but I still keep my saved money somewhere I can't reach easily, just in case. Which cool job is actually lame and boring? Oh my gosh, build a bear. The weirdest and most frustrating thing. Granted, I didn't make it a super long time in the job, and seeing kids happy is great, but they're really strict and the bad times get pretty bad. That store is just parents with sticker shock trying to talk their kids into cheaper options. You go in to do the little $35 bear and walk out $150 later with a bear in a full tuxedo with a skateboard and a construction helmet, so people are just kinda angry at you when you work there. I'm a forensic scientist, and it's literally the only thing people ask me about on dating apps. It's very technical work and it's extremely routine. Oh my god, same. I'm an archaeologist, and I imagine we have very similar conversations. Usually, when I meet people, I avoid the topic at this point because the pressure is on me to drive the energy of the conversations with the exciting 3% of what I do while avoiding too many technical terms. It's kind of deflating to see how quickly people go from 100% to 0 interest because of my explanation. Preschool teacher, especially with the new COVID-19 regulations. Have you ever tried social distancing 3-year-olds? Barnes & Noble. Your job has literally nothing to do with books, and it obviously attracts a lot of that type, myself included. Park ranger. Don't get me wrong, I loved it, but a lot of days it was less talk about cool animals while wearing your ranger hat, and more, the toilets are overflowing again, go clean the septic tank filter and stir the tank with a shovel. With a little bit of, hey, there's a crazy guy on Crystal down by the bridge, can you convince him to leave without murdering anyone? All for the low price of $26K per year with a college degree. I hate the idea that this comment might dissuade anyone else from becoming a park ranger. These jobs are so varied, and I just happened to work for an underfunded agency with too few staff. Honestly, I still loved the job and would have kept doing it forever if a higher-paying outdoor environmental job hadn't pretty much fallen into my lap. Being a park ranger taught me so much, and most importantly, I got trained as a wildland firefighter, which is still my favorite part of the job. If you've always dreamed of being a park ranger, please go for it. Yeah, I was thinking that if you got far away enough from any major cities, you could at least avoid the people who are just traveling out there to do substances. And then if you're really in the wilderness, they'll just get eaten by bears. Winning. Professional photographer. Not like hobbyist, but business-owning photographer. Sucks the love right out of your work. Because you started the business to take pictures, but then Karen doesn't like the way she looks in one of them, so she wants the whole set for free, plus a reshoot for free, plus those images for free. Then the two high school kids getting into a very ill-advised marriage at exactly 18 years old wants to book you for their wedding, but their budget is only $50. Then that Karen calls back because she now loves your work and wants to pay for another shoot, but only if you agree to do her friend's daughter's destination wedding for free. Then you get a call from your last bride. It's been 2 weeks since their wedding. Where the frick are her pictures? Then you get no leads from a bridal expo. Then a client finds out you don't support their political candidate and tries to take you to court to get their money back. Then some Insta thought who thinks she's influencing people offers a collab where you take professional photos of her and she adds a crappy Insta filter to it and claims her friend took them. And she's not going to pay. And then you get some entitled mum who wants you to photograph every day of her newborn's first year of life for $100. I just went back to being a hobbyist in the end. I do closed captioning. While I joke that, yes, I get paid to watch TV, it's actually very tedious. And if you don't actually enjoy the programming, you're being forced to watch something you don't care for. Or worse, it's something I do enjoy, like a long-form drama. We usually chop those up into 15-minute increments and split between everyone, so I only see chunks and not always even in order. It actually ruins the show for me. We tend to get a lot of complaints from hearing-abled people who don't understand captions were mainly intended for the hard of hearing and deaf, so hopefully you get to read my captions and the viewing experience is still just as enjoyable for you. Working in a flower shop. It's just like any other retail job, but people constantly tell you how fun your job must be. Also, helping grieving families choose funeral flowers isn't fun. I'm a marine biologist. I spent the last week measuring defrosted fish heads. Well, I'm a scientist. I don't know if people usually think of that career as fun, but I think people think it's a lot more eureka and less, this data has to be manually processed for 600 hours before I can analyze it.
Yep, as a bioscientist, it's never really eureka and much more, are my cells dead? Are my fruit flies okay? Are they going to fix the microscope? Will the microscope ever be free to book? Is 6 coffees too many? And a large part of my day is just spent doing tasks I need to keep my work running, like making buffers, sorting fly stocks, splitting cells, and cleaning things. And yet, I miss my lab whenever I'm not there.
Not a specific job, but traveling for work. I'm in tech, and a lot of people starting out talk about wanting to go to customer sites and get out in the field. I love to travel for fun, but it's hard to fit in the fun stuff when you have presentations and stuff to worry about, and a lot of times your customers aren't in the fun cities anyway. I also think I prefer the stability in day-to-day schedule of traveling less frequently. Had a colleague who complained and whined that he was so jealous until he hit the road and quit after less than a year doing that. Yeah, I get to go to some amazing places, but more often than not, I was in a crappy hotel in a crappy location. Even in great places, your colleagues or customers go home to their families, and as much as I love exploring alone, it does get lonely. Yes, my tiara hurts my head, wah wah. I finally stopped when I got assigned a new and fairly attractive destination, and all I could think of was, ugh, how long is that flight, and can someone else do it? I sure miss my exec platinum airline status, though. TV and film production. I think most people dream of being the actor, the director, and the people making the creative decisions, or the big shot producer calling the shots, but most of the people working in TV and film production are part of a machine, the grind, working in a system, trying to climb up to wherever they want to be. Many don't get to actualize their creative vision. Also, the industry can be project-based, which means job security concerns, and location-limited to New York, LA, and maybe a couple of other cities. The pay can be low starting out too, though it can be good if you work your way up. But I did enjoy the type of people that work these jobs, a little more fun than the business folk I work with now. I have a lot of respect for the TV and film industry. I'd go back to it, but I'd be careful about what the job and career path was. Okay, so not necessarily bad, but beekeeping. You gotta get used to the constant sound of buzzing during hive inspections and swarm removals, plus wearing that protective suit in hot weather for hours on end, give or take the situation. Also, there appears to be a large number of beekeepers allergic to bees, so EpiPens are a must. Photography. I burnt out after a few years. You realize how weddings are so cookie-cutter no matter how original the couple thinks they're being or the religious segment they're attached to. The crappiest one has got to be the couple who refused to honor the contract and didn't pay me after their wedding. Naturally, I held their photos until payment was made. They tried suing me for not delivering their photos because apparently the 50% deposit was enough. Frick that. Took it to court and the Justice of the Peace, this is in Canada, ordered him to pay. Wasted a day and $400 to file the case. It really annoyed me for a long time since I met this couple at a church I used to go to. We even all hung out with the other church friends prior to it. Years later, this jerk and his wife were found to be running an illegal puppy mill. He tried discarding one of the puppies at a plaza shopping mall by throwing it into a garbage can. The puppy was inside the garbage can and crying, and people heard it and rescued it. Security cameras caught and ID'd the guy clear as day. Police raided his house and found he had a bunch of animals in unkempt conditions, and the whole house smelled like crap. When you Google his name now, you find all of this. Pure karma. That well-deserved karmic blow towards these garbage people aside, this is our second story about photography. I've met equal number who've done it as their trade for many years and seem to love it, and hate it, and stories like this one just seem to repeatedly run into the worst crappy cheapskates in the world. My heart goes out to you hard-working camera jockeys. A pediatric nurse. Being a nurse for children and adolescents. Everyone in nursing school talks about how much they want to work with kids. The reality is that a pediatric nurse sees more cases of the worst sort of brutal parents and neglect than any other specialty. Doesn't matter where you are in the pediatric hospital, it's the thing you see most. I've seen so many DCS, which is the Department of Child Services, caseworkers that I've gotten to know some of them and become acquaintances with them. Sure, working with kids and adolescents is great, but people don't think about the most essential piece of that puzzle, which is their families. It doesn't matter how good of care you give to those kids, if you don't loop the parents into that care, you may as well just not be doing anything for them. I always say the more fun it is to go somewhere, the worse it is to work there. Like amusement parks and arcades. Honestly, every job that lots and lots of people really want to do sucks, mostly due to supply and demand. You're going to be treated like crap, and if you complain, you're going to be fired, because you're inherently replaceable because there's thousands of people that would love to do your job for even less money than you're making. I tried to explain this to my father when I was going to accept a bartending job at minimum wage. He said I should at least demand $15 an hour, and I told him they'd laugh me out of the bar and find some college student willing to work for less than minimum wage. The fact I'd be getting minimum wage was because I knew the bartenders and owner, so I would have started out at a higher position than just entry level. I didn't want to bartend, it was just a guaranteed job with people I knew right after I graduated. It was more than I had otherwise, and I was easily replaceable for cheaper. Baker. Coming into work at 3 or 4 a.m. so you idiots can have 6 a.m. baked goods is miserable. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Demolition. Everyone wants to break stuff with a sledgehammer. Everyone's tired of lifting that same sledgehammer after 5 swings. Nobody wants to load the broken stuff into bags or a wheelbarrow and take it to a dumpster. I did a 2-week demo job years ago where I had to use a 75-pound jackhammer to destroy a concrete slab and grind rebar into pieces. I'm in good shape, and that job messed me up. Video game testing. I've been working in the game industry for 6 years now and teaching for 2. Testing video games is thought of to be, oh, you just play games all day? But it's actually very specific and arduous. First of all, there's a bunch of testing methodologies such as load and soak testing, white room testing, version testing to name just a few, but the most common one is functionality testing. Functionality testing is, so if I walk into a corner with the rifle in my inventory, I can clip through the wall, but if I have the sawn-off in my inventory, I don't clip through. Paleontologists. You don't get to work with full dinosaur skeletons and do all kinds of awesome expeditions. You're mostly sitting at a desk looking at some pictures and logging stuff on your computer, maybe examining a fossil occasionally. If you're lucky, you can go on a real dig and, oh my god, spend hours in the hot sun dusting off rocks. Working in an animal shelter. For sure, it's probably less intense than zookeeping, but the amount of people who apply or volunteer expecting to come in and play with cute puppies all day is absurd. We're basically animal maids. You deal with animals of all sorts of behavioral and developmental stages, crapping and weeing everywhere, and you look over and this one fricking dog named Chumbawamba is sitting in his water bowl, so you've got to fill that up 6 times and dry his kennel out, and then you go and mop up the cat room. Around 10 kittens just want to eat your mop. And also 4 kids are just yelling that something has spewed up on the floor and I must clean it. Now. Not to mention all the extra behind-the-scenes work that the public never sees. How in the summer, during kitten and puppy season, the shelter built to house 500 animals has 750, and I didn't take lunch or sit at all for any of my shifts for the past 6 days. How the courts force us to put down animals that we know can be rehabilitated, but we don't get enough funding to fight it. How animal control just showed up with the 4th pregnant stray of the week, but intake is full and even double-stacked in some cases, so your co-worker fosters the cats in their own house. Not even to mention the crappy fricking people who do dumb crap and end up getting scratched or bitten, and the animal is the one who bears the consequences for that. I'm the proudest shelter worker in the world. I adore my job even at its hardest. I didn't sit for 9.5 hours today, and I found a cat turd in the cuff of my jeans. But it doesn't matter because a bonded pair of adult cats got adopted today. I took 6 applications this morning, and the cat in bank 4 with the goopy eye is already looking better, and we sent a mama out to foster. The hard work is always worth it for these babies. Listen, I know it was just an aside in your story, but I really want to hear more about Chumbawamba. Alright. Chumbawamba was this silky-coated black and brown hound mix. He was super gangly and tall and had these big old ears and was a very good boy. But every fricking day, without fail, he'd flip his water bowl even with a non-tip bowl. So he gave him a heavier, deeper bowl. Every day, at least 4 times a day, Chumbawamba got this enormous, heavy-bottomed water bowl filled. It held close to a gallon of water. It weighed about 10 pounds empty and was too heavy for me to even really lift when full. Oh, thought Chumbawamba, I cannot flip this big bowl. It's too heavy. But Chumbawamba was an innovator. Instead of just flipping the bowl, he said, what if I got rid of the water? Then I'd be strong enough to flip it. So there goes Chumbawamba diving front paws first into the bowl and essentially digging the water out until it was empty enough that he could flip it. He was a big, thirsty dork and I loved him, even though he super annoyed me when he dumped his bowls. Accountant. Everyone thinks it's all fun and number crunching, but the constant stream of women throwing their undies and wanting to bear your children is honestly exhausting. You can't fool us, commenter. We all know you're just trying to keep us away from your cool, rad job and the lifestyle that's basically just 1 tier below Kardashian on the sweet grift factor. We're getting our CPAs and coming for your cushy, party-filled gig. Being an extra in a movie. Now, it can be super fun. I especially love historical and post-apocalyptic or sci-fi fantasy type stuff, but a typical day on set wasn't what I thought it'd be when I started doing it. Often we have to get up at 3 or 4 in the morning to get to holding, and if you're a minute late to check in, sometimes they'll just kick you out. Then we sit around in holding with sometimes hundreds of other extras, and we're usually sitting there for a good 3 or 4 hours before they start telling us to get ready to film. During this time, we go through a long wardrobe period, hair and makeup lines where they reuse clothes unless you bring them yourself, brushes and makeup without washing them. When we finally get to film, it's often the same mundane motions over and over, exceptions of course, and those are always fun. Then we either get shuffled around or go back to holding. Several more hours pass, we go film again. Hungry? You get lunch 6 hours after your call time and a usually meager supply of snacks. In between takes, it's more standing around, often in heat or rain, or you'll get shuffled into cramped spaces to wait. Days on set are often more than 12 hours, and I know someone who had to be on set for 26 hours straight. They can legally hold you there until they declare filming is done, so don't make plans for the next day. Not to mention that you rarely see yourself in the final cut. I'm not trying to bash other background actors or the film industry because I've met lots of cool people and gotten to do some pretty awesome things. For example, interacting with main characters in scenes, running around in the woods with fake weapons, or being a zombie. But when I did my first job as a teen, I definitely thought it would be a lot different. And I'm not part of the SAG union. Extras who are part of that do indeed get treated better with more perks. Also, it may be different in Hollywood. I've only worked in Georgia. I've also been a stand-in, and I like that a lot better because you're treated as the crew rather than, well, as an extra. Flight attendant. You're on call, on reserve, forever, and have a terrible schedule, have no life, and make no money for the first 5 to 10 years. And while you work for peanuts, you can't afford to use your flight benefits in any substantial way. Then, when you finally get a chance to use your benefits for a trip, you have to fly standby, which means you aren't guaranteed to get on the flight that you want. And then, if you do make it out of town, you'd better have like a week off so you can make damn sure you're back in your base city in time for your next work shift. Did I mention that there's an act of US legislation, the Railway Labor Act, that allows airlines to exploit so you don't get paid for certain work hours that you actually need to be working? For example, flight attendants don't get paid for boarding or any time the plane is at the gate. Worst job ever. Google Street View driver. You're all alone for more than 8 hours a day, can almost never take a break, need to be constantly on and focused lest you crash the 25 grand Subaru with the 60 grand worth of camera equipment in it. You end up becoming an amateur meteorologist to keep track of weather patterns and cloud cover, and in my experience, there are a lot of people who just get insanely angry at you, at Google, and the job in general for a wide variety of reasons. I enjoyed myself when I did it, but it was nowhere near as glamorous or fun as I or my friends or family assumed. The pay? $15 an hour, but contingent on hours driven, which were themselves dependent on clear weather to ensure optimal image clarity. Why not drive every day no matter the weather? Well, Google got around this problem by making you redrive routes whose pictures turned out subpar. To prevent people double billing by driving the same easy route constantly, you also had a weekly quota of unique miles driven, so no double dipping. What could you do in the car? As long as the camera and mapping software was running properly, I was on my own. I listened to music, the news, and lots of books on tape. I could stop for short bathroom breaks whenever I felt like it, and I had an hour guaranteed for lunch whenever I wanted to take it, which usually amounted to eating in the car on the side of some lonely rural road 90% of the time. Who would ever think this was fun or glamorous? All I can say is back in 2012, most people I talked to were pretty excited, myself included, about getting the chance to do any work with Google. Let alone this cool new project that would let you see what any place on Earth looked like at street level from the comfort of your home. This was the era of Google Plus being a potentially exciting new thing, and of Google Glass being the future of tech, and overall it was a different time. That's why everyone I knew thought it was a cool gig. Being a character performer at Disney. Don't get me wrong, there are some amazing perks and truly magical moments. I know I'm super lucky and tons of people would love to be in my shoes. But the day-to-day work is exhausting in ways I never thought possible. Guests can be truly awful. I've had things said and done to me I never would have imagined. The company isn't always great, it highly depends on your leadership. And there's so much focus on your body and face, good and bad focus, that it can be incredibly depressing and difficult emotionally. Plus, you have to accept that there's very little upward mobility. Most people grow out of it, and it's rough to know that one day you'll get too old or too fat, and you'll have to start all over in a new career field. So you're either constantly thinking about what you're going to do when you leave, or how you're going to keep yourself there. I personally knew it would be temporary, and now I only work there seasonally while I have a normal career. But Disney has a way of sucking you in. Being a writer. I always thought it was my absolute dream job, but the only job I could get after college was working in a content mill as a blog writer. I used to work 70-hour weeks staring at the computer in the basement of an old bank writing bullcrap articles about the dangers of mold, fence cleaning, and why you need a commercial awning, and the dream turned into a nightmare. While I still write occasionally, I'm now working as a communications person, so it's a bit less heavy. Which brat put you off having kids forever? Walked past that play area in the mall. The sound was deafening. I'm convinced that the boy who cried wolf was made because kids love to scream bloody murder for no reason. In 8th grade, I had to take care of a robot baby. The first night I had it, the damn thing woke me up at 2 a.m. screaming as loud as it could. My mum heard this and came into my room. All she sees is me cradling this robot, not knowing what to do and freaking out, basically crying myself. My mum takes the baby into her room and starts cradling it until she thinks to herself, "What the frick am I doing?" She then proceeds to wrap the baby in a series of blankets and puts it in her closet for the rest of the night. I myself would proceed to do this every night until the assignment was over. F that robot. That was 8 or 9 years ago, and I still don't want any kids. Anytime a child throws a tantrum in public? Yeah, be a good parent. If a kid throws a tantrum, well, we're going home now. Easier if both parents are there in a restaurant. One takes the crappy child to the car, the other pays the bill and gets the food to go. In a mall or something, you just walk out. Kids eventually learn to shut up and get over it. When I had to ride in a car for 45 minutes with my little sister and a 5-year-old she was babysitting. For the entire ride, the kid screamed, pausing only to take a breath or giggle. It took 10 years, but I kept the promise I made that day and got sterilized. No regrets. All day, every day, I work as a teacher. There is a saying or proverb in Polish that you use to wish a misfortune on someone. I wish you to get to teach other people's children. I'm the youngest of a slew of co-workers in a small office. My biggest turn-off for having kids someday is them complaining or talking about them 24/7. If they're such a hassle, it really doesn't seem to be worth the time and money investment in raising them. One day, one of them said, "Oh, don't worry, when you have kids someday, they'll be all you talk about as well." Yep, screw that. Misery loves company, I guess. For the record, the narrator, after seeing the best and worst of these little monsters, still thinks they're worth a shot. But yeah, a lot of people just seem to really do nothing but complain about their kids. I remember my dad asking 8-year-old me if I wanted kids. My reply was, "No, because I don't want kids messing up my house like we mess up yours." When they scream. Fricking monsters. Anything larger than a cat should not be physically capable of making noises above 1 to 1200 Hz. At that point, that creature is a banshee from folklore and needs to be silenced. When I was doing one of those "what do you want to be when you grow up" things in school, and realized after someone asked why I never factored kids in there. As a girl, that's totally what you're supposed to do, right? I could never come up with an answer as to why I never factored having kids into that plan because, simply enough, I didn't want them. I was about 10 then, and I'm 26 now. I still don't want kids, and I don't think I'll ever change my mind. Every single time I walk by an obviously pregnant person, I never want my body to do that. Hard nope. I made the decision when my mother, who's an OB-GYN, sat me down at about 18 and told me that having children was the worst decision she ever made. I'm a lot like her, and I could see myself repeating the same patterns of behavior that negatively affected my own life with whatever spawn I might have. I actually really respect her for being honest with me and not perpetuating the "having children is your purpose and miracle" fallacy. Now I'm nearly 30 and I don't want kids. I'm not sure I'll ever feel ready to give up my lifestyle. I have all the freedoms of an adult and the responsibilities of a teenager. If I want to spend my day off getting drunk or spend my last tenner on brunch, that's what I do. I have a disposable income and disposable time. Also, now that I have cancer, I'm off work full-time, and if I want to nap, I can nap. I don't have to worry about keeping my crap together for the kids. It's such a weight off knowing that I only have to worry about my needs right now. I wouldn't mind dating someone with kids though. I could be the cool stepmom on the weekends. Part-time parent. My revelation came babysitting my niece. At the time, my brother worked swing shifts and his wife worked overnights. So occasionally I'd have to babysit from 10 to midnight, and my niece was always asleep. It was basically get there and watch TV for 2 hours or nap. It was nice. Then one day it all went to hell. The person who would have taken over for my brother called off, and he couldn't get off work till 8 a.m. and his wife didn't come home till later than that. 12-hour shifts and drive time. I couldn't stay all night like that as I had work at 7 in the morning. Then my niece woke up. I love my niece, but it was past her bedtime. She was 5 at the time. She started screaming, not in pain, not in anger, just screaming to scream. At that point, their dog got overly excited and was jumping around. I had a girl screaming and a dog running around and barking. Then my brother calls to tell me he'll be home at 4 and I tell him Katie's up. While I'm on the phone, I've got Katie screaming in my ear and the dog biting my arm, and I'm doing everything I could to keep the dog away from the niece, as if he bit her, it would just make my life worse. I gave the phone to my niece and my brother tells her to go to bed, and she starts throwing a tantrum. She goes up to her room, and for the next hour, I hear the sounds of things smashing, being thrown around, and it sounded like a fricking war room. Then it quieted down. I went up there and she was sleeping on the bed, and there were broken toys, ripped up books, dents in the wall, things knocked over, clothes everywhere. I decided I didn't want kids after that. I have a dog. He doesn't bark and just lays around. This is a good life. In an economics class I took in high school, we were assigned to pretend that we were 10 years older and create a budget that would let us live off $2,000 a month. We were allowed to live anywhere, use whatever method of transportation we wanted. I decided I wanted to live in the mountains, somewhere with cheap rent, and I'd ride my bike around the small mountain town. The rest of the budget went to savings or buying cool crap I'd want, like video games. I handed in my project and my teacher tells me I have to do it again because I didn't include a wife and children. I asked him why I had to get married, and he just looked at me like I was stupid. I mean, it sounds terrible, but my nephew made me realize I want to stay child-free. I know he was a baby, but he was the most pitiful kid ever. He'd cry over anything. I don't have the patience for that, and I never will. Everyone says, when it's your kid, it's different. No, I'd still be annoyed and there won't be a my kid. I mean, that sounds like a pretty harsh way of thinking about a baby, but at least you know it isn't for you, and you can put your energy into something else, like hobbies, partying, or paying people on the internet to send you bottles of their bathwater. The narrator is still waiting for his first offer on that last one. I'm a 23-year-old girl. I've had plenty of these. In fact, I can't recall ever having had an I want to have kids moment. I'll list the most trivial reasons first. I don't like the idea of enduring hours and hours of excruciating pain only to push a watermelon-sized object out of my hoo-ha and to have it begin to spew and crap all over me. I don't like the idea of postpartum depression or losing my figure. It's hard enough to keep my tummy tight, thank you. Or worse, of being obligated to never spend any of my money and time on myself, ever. Which is the sentiment I get from my friends who are mothers. They don't get a minute to themselves. But apparently they love it. They love being a mum. They have some sort of maternal instinct that I don't have. I guess that makes all of those things I listed seem like selfish reasons not to have a kid, and that's cool. I'm happy it means something for them, and I might even think their kids are cute in a passive sort of way, but the idea of having one myself is just not appealing. I worked in retail. Once when I used to be a cashier, I was ringing up a lady's stuff, and I remember being fairly sure something was seriously wrong with her kids, like they needed professional help. They were red-faced, screaming, and just saying the worst possible crap you could say. I don't remember what, as it was more than a year ago and I kind of blocked it out. She kept trying to discipline them at first, appropriately, telling them to knock it off and there'd be no TV when they got home, and she's taking their toys away, whatever. I could also tell she really wanted to just leave, get in the car, we're going home, move. But she also really needed the stuff in the cart, mostly food for them, several $100s worth of it. She didn't have the energy to go through this again. At some point during the transaction, she just gave up. I could see it in her eyes. She just didn't care any more about shutting the little frickers up in this moment. I didn't blame her. She was tired. I'd never seen anyone that looked so tired, so listless. As she was trying to swipe her card, her 6-year-old grabbed it out of her hand, looks at her with vacant eyes, and throws it on the floor. She briefly went through the motion of trying again, and he climbed up on the cart and grabbed it again and threw it. They're all screaming like they're being kidnapped. Over the noise in the background, the deafening cacophony of these 3 inhumane creatures, she yelled an apology to me at the top of her lungs and tried once again to swipe her card. The kid knocked it out of her hand, and she burst into tears. Finally, when she managed to pay, she just turned around and left the store with the cart full of crap she brought these undeserving little brats because she had to, not because she wanted to. She looked so ashamed of herself. Not of them, but of herself. She didn't want to be there because she didn't want people to know how tired she was or the extent of what she puts up with. She didn't want people to know that the strength she had to swipe her card at the very end was the last iota of strength she had left in her at all. She cried silently as the little frickers continued to scream all the way out the door. I think that was the moment where I went from, I don't really want kids right now, to, I'm never having kids, not now, not ever. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I renew my vows literally every time my coworker complains of how little sleep or money or time he has. I just looked around and felt that the world already had a sufficiency of children. Why add another one when we are already well over the quota for population density in my area? Also, we don't make enough money to support a child the way I'd like to. Growing up poor was not pleasant for me, and I wouldn't want to make someone else do it. I'd rather save up and chip in for another promising kid's college who doesn't have the money than spend all that money doing financial stability for my own personal child. Just seeing how kids turn out. I feel like I'd be too hard on my kid. Well, not hard, I just want them to be a super good person and care about people in general. I have two friends. One babies his son to an extreme, so much you can see it's hurting the kid developmentally. The kid baby talks and can't do anything for himself and scream cries when the toilet flushes because he's terrified. The guy just coddles and babies this kid, and if anyone points out how behind the kid is, the guy says, "Sorry, I'm just being a good dad." Being up your kid's butt all the time babying him doesn't mean you're some super dad. Another guy I know had a little girl and they spoil her rotten, and she's selfish and expects everything handed to them. I'd just set way too high standards and I wouldn't be able to say, okay, they're just a kid. I've never had an I want to have kids moment. Since I was a kid myself, the idea of having them strongly repulsed me. When I found out what an episiotomy was, and then again when I heard there were degrees of tearing, don't Google 4th degree tears. Just don't. Because I know that if my kid pushed me too far, I'd resort to corporal punishment. Nothing I wouldn't want done to me, but that's still not really societally acceptable. Plus, they absorb a ton of time, money, and life. I don't have time for that. I wouldn't sacrifice what my parents did for a person like me. Well, I can't sympathize with being able to think I'd do that to a kid, but I guess it's better to know that and not have kids than not realize it until it's too late. My God. My long-term boyfriend told me he didn't want kids about a year and a half ago, and for a couple of months I convinced myself he'd change his mind when we got a little older and more established. Then his cousin had a kid. I'll never forget waking up hungover as frick to that baby screaming bloody murder, neither parent there to take care of it. My boyfriend's cousin went to the store without warning either of us, and that poor kid needed a diaper change. I could barely pick him up without gagging from the smell, and I nearly strangled the cousin when he finally got back. Then I realized how drastically my life was going to change if and when I had kids. No more parties, no more vacations, especially once they were in school, no spending money on whatever I wanted. Call me selfish, I don't give a frick. Hearing the horror stories from multiple people about the little hellion my boyfriend was as a small child, and remembering what a jerk I was starting from about 11 years old and continuing through my late teens, helped seal my resolve in the matter. As if all that wasn't enough, I briefly considered being a surrogate until I heard the gosh-awful birth stories from my mum and future mother-in-law. Tearing from my V to my A doesn't sound pleasant. Then I read some internet stories about childbirth and decided I didn't want to be a surrogate anymore. I wouldn't be a good mum, I'm not good with kids and they stress me out. I'm selfish and I would likely end up regretting having kids, which would make me feel like a terrible person. Plus, I love sleeping in, and I have a bad habit of being pretty mean if someone or something wakes me up before I want to get up. Like I said, I'm selfish and I don't give a frick. Now, anytime I'm around children or listen to my friends talk about life with children, I think to myself, F that S. When I finally realized how miserable having children would make me, it was like a huge weight was lifted off my chest. I felt so free, and I wouldn't change that feeling for anything. My little brother is about 12 years younger than me. I've learned firsthand from him. I discovered right this fricking minute. I've been taking care of my sister-in-law's granddaughter while her daughter is in the hospital for minor surgery. I regret every fricking second of it, and I detest myself for trying yet again to be a nice guy. First off, the sister-in-law is a horrible fricking witch, and I knew her daughter carried forth a lot of her mother's bullcrap characteristics, but my fricking god, this child, I fricking hate her. I never imagined I'd have hateful feelings for a 4-year-old, but I do. Unless some magical meteor falls out of the sky and strikes this beast on the head with some common fricking sense and manners, she's going nowhere in life. Every time I turn my back to even take a leak, she's fricking something up or causing turmoil in the house. Whether it's digging through the fridge and leaving perishables out on the floor, even though I just fed her 10 minutes before, or slamming cabinet doors because I don't fricking know why, or clipping leashes on my old rescue dog and playing Walk, which consists of her tugging and tugging on my poor dog's harness as it mutters and looks for me to help him. I've asked her what her favorite lunch was and she said grilled cheese. So I made grilled cheese and then walked to put laundry from the washer to the dryer, only to return 3 minutes later to find her digging through the fridge again and the sandwich in the trash can. I'm no stranger to kids either. I raised my first wife's 2 kids, I inherited my daughter after her father had an accident, I have 2 other sons of my own, and I adopted my wife's 3 children. I'm a mother-frickin' 8-star general when it comes to kids and their quirks, but my god, this child is a worthless frickin' butthole. I've bitten my tongue in silence to the point of exhaustion, and I haven't treated her indifferently or mentioned my true feelings about her with my wife, but I'm pretty sure she knows. I think she knows because she's been way too over-the-top nice to me for these past 2 days. Coffee overfloweth, kisses on the neck 10 times, chilled beers handed to me with a glowing smile. Yeah, she knows. I feel so much better being able to vent this crap anonymously online because I'm damn sure anyone would justifiably reel back in horror if they heard me say these things up front face to face. I would have been shocked as well before yesterday. My mother decided to have another kid when I was 13. We lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment. They put his crib in their room, thank goodness, but on the same wall where the top of my bed was. I couldn't sleep for about 9 months. I ended up having to restart my school grade, and I could never have friends over because it was too loud for the baby. So yeah, screw the little jerks. Not to get too dark, but I remember watching an interview of the mother of one of the victims of America's many high school weapon-related mass tragedies. She said she gave birth, looked at her son and felt like a dark cloud went over, and how her first thought was, this child will bring you sorrow. Just no. Very morbid, but that creeped me out. When all of my friends that had kids disappeared from my life as they have no time to themselves at all anymore. And they always look tired and they're getting fatter quickly. It's like they don't even have the time to plan their meals properly, so they just don't eat healthy. And when we do get together, it's not the same. It changes people. They can't just hang out anymore. It needs to be a planned event. I've got one life, guys. The world is already overpopulated. I'm going to do me. And separated couples with kids is hell on earth 99% of the time. Since we asked a specific question asking for people who are anti-kid to apply with their answers, it's fair enough that we've got answers that are very negative about the subject. But the narrator would like to state that he knows many parents who thrive and even seem happier after the fact. So if you want or have kids and are feeling challenged by this video, keep thinking over why, but know that these answers don't actually represent a universal experience of raising a family. Every time my friends can't do anything fun because they have to go to their kids' events. I'm all down for children, but be reasonable and don't have them if you aren't ready to give them your life. Every single time one of my coworkers has to stay out of work because their kids is sick. Every single time they zone out because they only got 2 hours of sleep. Oh, it's worth it, they'll say. I call bullcrap on that. This Be the Verse by Philip Larkin. They frick you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. But they were fricked up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself. As soon as I started teaching the special need ones, there's a part of me that never wants to take that risk. I understand completely that there are plenty of people with special needs who live full, rich, independent lives, but there are also plenty that will have the mental capabilities of a 3-year-old no matter how much you try to teach them. There are plenty who'll need to use diapers for their whole lives. When they get finished with school, maybe they can get a very menial job somewhere, but more likely they never will. They'll live at home until their parents can't physically take care of them anymore, and then they'll go into a group home. When I was young, I recall my mum telling me kids were an 18-year commitment, and that's always been in my head anytime I think about having kids. I'm not ready for an 18-year commitment now, even at 31. Also, it's probably related that I'm the oldest daughter in a family of 6 kids. I did a lot of babysitting when I was younger. I enjoy my sleep, I enjoy my money, I enjoy a clean house. I babysat my niece for an afternoon last week, and I crap you not, I've never wanted to punt a kid like a goddamn football before. I get it, kids can be hyper, but my brother and sister let this little bag of crap get away with murder. They laugh when she says mean, spiteful things and talk back to me or her grandparents. Oh, and take pictures when she messes up the house, like Flour and OJ all over the kitchen. And then they get mad when we tell this kid no. Which, I don't want to take you to the zoo and watch you act like a damn fool. She pulls my dog's tail and ears, and luckily Jamie is a good sport about it. My sister-in-law had the gall to witch me out. If your dog snaps and bites her, I'm going to take a weapon and put that mutt in the ground. Sorry, it's been one hell of a weekend. What basic fact broke your brain? When I was a little kid, my mum would bet me that I couldn't eat my carrots without making them make a snap noise. I was determined to prove her wrong, carefully biting in until snap. Damn it. Let's try the next one. Careful, snap. Damn it. I think I was about 16 before I realized she didn't care in the slightest about the bet, she just wanted me to eat my darn veggies. That's actually pretty clever. My mum is a sneaky one. She teaches elementary school and she's still using this bet on kids to this day. When I was 16, I worked weekends at a pharmacy. One morning, right after the store opened, some guy came in, shops around the store for a little while, and leaves without buying anything. Except when he gets to the door, he trips on our rug and falls flat on his face. I immediately stuck my head over the counter to make sure he was okay when he yelled, "Those aren't mine," and runs out. I look down on the ground and there's 2 badly dented 20-ounce beers on the ground. My initial thought was, oh my god, he tripped on those beers. Who put those on the ground by the exit? It took me about an hour to realize what he was actually up to. I grew up pretty sheltered and I never swore. In high school, I heard someone say mofo once, and I thought it sounded pretty cool. So I went around calling my friends and even a teacher mofo for a few days before someone finally told me it was short for mother fricker. I got an electric toothbrush for my birthday. I was also traveling with family at the time. I happened to lose my toothbrush and looked everywhere for it. I was about to search through my dad's bags when I hit a side pocket and something started buzzing. Immediately, I wanted to search it and my dad flatly denied it, even slapping my hand away. We had an awkward moment where we didn't make eye contact. I was so mad, but I let it drop. Later that day, I was cleaning out a box from the car when lo and behold, I found my toothbrush. Cold realization washed over me. If it was an electric shaver, Dad would have taken it out and shown me. In the top 3 most embarrassing is when someone casually mentioned that Diagon Alley in Harry Potter was just diagonally. I died a little that day. And then there's Nocturne Alley, nocturnally. As is often the case with these sorts of videos, the narrator just kind of hears about a whole bunch of dumb mistakes that he's also been making for way too long. In this case, I did actually know about diagonally, but nocturnally sailed right over my head. At a grade school field trip to a local nature trail, we were treated to a scavenger hunt. We divided into teams and drew our list from a hat. My team was to search for 10 objects that were evidence that people have been in the park. All of the lists were similar. We were picking up trash. Pimps. I thought they were just colorfully dressed black men, the African-American equivalent of the 90s swing dancing, zoot suit riot craze. Keep your pimp hand strong meant you literally needed a strong hand for slapping that upright bass. For way too long, I wondered why we never heard about all the other units' code names, like from A0 to Z9. Why is it only the K9 unit? Oh. Mine would have to be the Scarecrow. I realized at 18 years old that it's called that because it scares crows. I realized that pitch black meant something was as dark as pitch, and I've helped my neighbors shingle roofs several times before. One day, while driving my mother around town, it randomly dawned on me what my parents were really doing when they locked themselves in their bedroom and told me that they were going to talk about my birthday and Christmas presents. My parents would take naps in the afternoon, on weekends, and lock their bedroom door. They'd also get really mad if you bothered them during that time. It took me a long time to figure out what was really going on. Not me, but my husband. One evening we were out bowling with friends, and I took my purse to the bathroom with me. My husband was saying, "Why are you taking your purse to the bathroom? Don't you trust your friends?" While all of our female friends were giving him that look. After a while, it dawns on him why I might be taking the purse to the bathroom, and he says, "Oh, that's why Mom always got mad when I asked her that question when I was a kid. We were married, y'all. Definitely old enough to know better." Green herb. When I was a really little kid, I saw my dad and his friend, quote, rolling their own cigarettes. It wasn't until college that I smelled what was apparently really good green herb, and I said, "Hey, that smells like my dad's cigarette." Oh. I overheard a coworker talking about her pet duck, and I was fascinated. I asked her questions about her duck, like what it ate, and I expressed fascination that she took it on walks. She looked at me strangely when I asked more questions and expressed more enthusiasm for all the things her duck did. She had one amazing duck. It even did tricks. I always brought up her duck in conversations. One day, about 6 months later, she brought her dog into work. Well, I came to the wrong conclusion, but it was at the time I thought all of my friends' parents had acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. When I was 8 years old, I asked my mum how babies are made. She gave me a clear, honest answer. From doing the deed. A few months later, we began taking care of a family friend who was dying from a transmissible disease I mentioned at the start. I asked my mum how someone gets it, to which my mum responded, "From doing the deed." So I put 2 and 2 together and went to school the next day and burst into tears, telling all of my friends that our parents were going to die because we were all made from doing the deed, and that gives you acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. I thought my roommate in college had a live-in girlfriend that I never saw. There were always women's clothes strewn all around his room, pink flip-flops and high heels at the door, and lots of feminine hair and skincare products. One day we were sitting on the couch playing video games when I asked him, "Hey, why is it that I never see your girlfriend around?" He looked at me and said, "I don't have a girlfriend, I've been single since I got here." "Oh, whose high heels are those in the hallway?" He gave me one of those looks like he couldn't quite comprehend it, and then it suddenly dawned on him, "Dude, we've been living together for a year and a half and you haven't figured out I'm trans?" In hindsight, it was rather obvious. Eminem. M and M. Marshall Mathers. I realized this last year and I'm 21. I realized on a road trip that hazmat means hazardous materials. I was 23 when I made that realization. Well, once again, the narrator is in their mid-30s and didn't realize this right up until they wrote the script for this video, so consider me dunked on. Embarrassingly enough, it took me a long time to get the K Jeweler's "every kiss begins with K" pun. I legit remember saying out loud, "Oh my god, the letter K. Duh." The "Christmas only comes once a year" joke from the end of The World Is Not Enough. I only got it about a month ago. I'm 23 and I've watched that movie dozens of times. It was like a pin dropping. I suddenly went, "Oh, I get it. Oh dear." English is not my mother tongue, but I've been speaking it fluently for about 15 years now. Some weeks ago, out of the blue, I had the sudden realization that the word movie is just a short form for moving pictures. Mind blown. I was about 23 or 24, I'd been smoking out with friends the previous evening and wanted to clean out my pipe. There were cruddy bits of resin and gunk, if only I had something good to clean this with. Some kind of long, stiff yet flexible wire with a cleaning surface. Wouldn't it be great to have a pipe cleaning tool? A pipe cleaner? I'd never put it together that pipe cleaners were meant to clean pipes. I'd only ever used them to make crafts at school and summer camp. A fortnight is 14 nights. Seemed such a weird word before I found that out. In my drama class, we listened to a few songs from a musical at a time and then analyzed them. The first one we listened to was Hair. My teacher would bleep out the swear words by making this loud screaming or whooping sound, and I never understood why. One day we were discussing and I ended up saying, "Oh, do you make up that noise to cover up the swear words?" And my teacher looked at me and asked what I thought he was doing. I thought you were really excited about musicals. The entire class started slow clapping for my stupidity. A couple of years ago, I realized the Target logo is a target. My father didn't understand that Cruella de Vil was a play on Cruel Devil until he saw it on a license plate one day while driving me to school. Everything I'm trying to debug. I've delayed myself an entire hour because of one semicolon? Again? Excellent. I worked in a lighting warehouse over the last few summers. We refer to 12,000 watt lights as 12Ks. I'm like, okay, K equals 1,000. It took me until my second summer working there, at 18 years old, to realize that K wasn't just shorthand for 100, it's short for kilo, as in 12 kilowatts. God bless America. When I attended the West End show The Lion King, I genuinely expected there to be giraffes, lions, hyenas, and other such animals on stage. My crestfallen disappointment swiftly turned to embarrassment as I'd already loudly raised certain logistical queries around this with other members of our party and people sat there in the theater. What happens if the hyenas get overexcited and just attack Timon and Pumbaa? When I realized, I sat very quietly for the duration of the show. I was 27. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I only recently realized that Iceland, the supermarket we have here in England, was called that because they mostly sold frozen food. One day when I was a kid, I realized that the word vitamins was a portmanteau for vital minerals. It was embarrassing because it totally isn't that. You're close though. Vitamins come from vital amines, and although not all vitamins are amines, they are all vital. My mum used to say things like, "We have to rush because your dad is an old fuddy-duddy and likes getting to places half an hour early." About 2 weeks ago, I booked a table for 7:30 and told the missus it was 7 so that we were only 5 minutes late. The penny dropped for me. My mum's friends would invite her to dinner and would always tell her to show up an hour to 90 minutes before so she'd actually be on time. "Oh yeah, come for dinner. We are eating at 5:30. Come at 5:30. The narrator has had partners where he's been tempted to pull this tactic before, but then he realized that if he ever got caught in the act, he could potentially be revealed as having lied to his partner for multiple years. Whether or not it was for a valid reason probably wouldn't factor into things. Breakfast is called breakfast because it's when you break your fast. I was 28 and like many people, I realized it from Game of Thrones. Patrick Star is so stupid because he literally lives under a rock. It took me a while to realize it was called afternoon because it took place after noon. Wait till you figure out the meaning of weekend. April of 2015, I called my parents. "Happy anniversary, Mum and Dad. How many years is it?" My mum says, 22. Wait, so you got married in April of 1993? Yes. I was born in August of 1993. Yes. So technically, I was in there? Yes. Anything else you want to share? Oh, I was married once before your father for 4 months. What? The first symbol in the Disney logo is just a fancy D. When I was a kid, I thought it was some crazy design, never challenged the idea until much later. When I was growing up, we did a lot of chores around the house, including gathering up everyone's laundry. My dad always used a cloth hanky and has his entire adult life. Gross, I know. And he always keeps one in his back pocket. Every so often, Mum would pull out their bed and have us collect all the hankies my dad had stuffed behind the headboard. Literally 20 or 30 of them all gunked up. My child brain thought Dad had night allergies and was hocking weird loogies into them. My adult brain realized they were his splooge rags because they used the pull-out method. It was the 70s and 80s and birth control wasn't nearly as advanced as it is now. I just realized the band The Beatles is a play on words with the word beat, like a music beat. When my mum told me 2 days ago that women do not in fact pee out of their hoo-has, I'm an 18-year-old male. Washington, D.C. was not in the state of Washington. Only recently found out that pickles were cucumbers originally. I just thought they were another kind of vegetable and that when you pickled something, you were putting it in pickle juice. Back in high school, I knew these two identical twins. I was sitting with them at lunch, either first or second day of grade 9, and at one point I noticed they looked alike. I said something along the lines of, "You guys look alike," and one of them was like, "Yeah, we're twins." I even remember during the assembly earlier that day, I sat beside one of them and I saw her sister sitting somewhere further down, and I was confused. I was on a travel assignment years ago where another coworker and I sometimes flew to a regional airport together. One flight, the flight attendant made some incomprehensible announcement on the PA just before people started deplaning. My ears were a wreck from the flight, so I had no idea what she had said. As I got off, she glared at me and said sarcastically, "Nice." A few months later, my coworker and I were talking about something or other, and he mentions the time some kid barfed all over the airplane aisle, and I guess I stepped in it that time. Florida. I realized at the age of 23 that the Count from Sesame Street is a multi-level pun. It blew my gosh darn mind. In ancient folklore, vampires were actually obsessed with counting. One of the ways to outrun them was to spill a bag of rice. They'd get caught up obsessively counting the rice grains, so it's like a triple-level pun. I mean, that second comment is just a very cool piece of trivia. See? We're not just here to make you feel dumb, folks. You can see the moon because the sun is shining light on its surface. Just hit me like a ton of bricks when I was about 20 or so. Don't know what I thought before that. Some teacher failed at their job. Bill Nye was booed by a bunch of Christians for telling them that a year or so ago, so don't feel bad. Last year at age 42, I realized that Staples sold all the staples you need for your business, and that they didn't just pick a random office supply for the name. I figured it might as well have been staplers or paper clips. That someone I knew in my family was a closet green herb smoker. Literally, the person I knew for years had smoked green herb in their closet and always covered it up. I put 2 and 2 together when I started to smoke. That donut holes are from the center part of the round donut. I always assumed it was a donut hole, like WHOLE, and it didn't occur to me until last year. Growing up, my cousin's grandmother had a female friend she lived with. It was kind of an open secret that she was her lesbian girlfriend and nobody cared. I'm now 29 and was recently talking to my cousin about it. My mother, who spent a lot of time with these two women, said, "Wait, they were lesbians?" Still not clear how this is something a bunch of 12-year-olds figured out, but my mum couldn't. I grew up very poor and way out in the country. One night while visiting some friends for dinner, we got lost and ended up being late. My friend's wife goes to fix me a plate for dinner and she put it in the microwave. It was at this point I realized that she put some corn on my plate. I ran as fast as I could across the dining area and told her to make it stop. She did and asked what was the matter. I then let her know that I didn't want the thing turning my corn into popcorn. Sophomore year of college, it finally dawned on me that one of 3 off-campus apartment mates was gay when I came back earlier than he had expected one night and saw him on the sofa with another guy. He never gave any hints about his sexuality before then, but I put 2 and 2 together when it occurred to me that the only people he ever hung out with were males and that he had no typical straight interests. Late to the thread, but I didn't realize the symbol on Superman's chest was an S. I saw the negative space around the S and thought it was some crazy Kryptonian language. We did an art project in grade school, I think it was probably 3rd or 4th grade, where you'd draw a word you thought described you and add other elements to it. You could use the dictionary or thesaurus to pick a word. I wanted to do something about being smart or sensible, but I didn't think either of those were pretty enough words. So I picked the word sensual. My teacher even tried to dissuade me, but I refused to listen. The worst part is I picked it from the dictionary but didn't look at the definition. I didn't think about it again until I saw all the words displayed a few years later when I was in the 6th grade. At that point, I wanted to die inside. Not me, but my husband didn't learn that meet you there at quarter after means 15 minutes after, not 25 minutes after the hour. A quarter, like 25 cents, not 1/4. We're in our mid-20s. I saw a brick on the outside of my school that said Anno Domini and a year. Saw another Anno Domini brick on a friend's church. I loudly proclaimed that the architects for both were the same person. Weeks later, it occurred to me that they were the dates over 100 years apart. I wish I hadn't been telling people all about that guy Anno Domini for the weeks until I figured it out. Anno Domini means Year of Our Lord, so the date built. Noodles and Company is called that because you eat noodles with company. There isn't some other noodle company that the restaurant owns. While some of these have made the narrator feel very, very dumb, there have been a few like this last one that soften the blow and inform us that at least there's someone below us in the ranking of human intelligence. So thank you, commenter. The 6th grade science teacher, Mrs. Parks, asked her class, "Which human body part increases to 10 times its size when stimulated?" No one answered until little Mary stood up and said, "You should not be asking 6th graders a question like that. I'm going to tell my parents, and they'll go and tell the principal who'll fire you." Miss Parks ignored her and asked the question again. "Which body part increases to 10 times its size when stimulated?" Little Mary's mouth fell open. Then she said to those around her, "Boy, is she going to get in big trouble." The teacher continued to ignore her and said to the class, "Anybody?" Finally, Bill stood up, looked around nervously and said, "The body part that increases to 10 times its size when stimulated is the pupil of the eye." Mrs. Parks said, "Very good, Billy." Then turned to Mary and continued, "As for you, young lady, I have 3 things to say. 1, you have a very dirty mind. 2, you didn't read your homework. And 3, one day you're going to be very, very disappointed." I just figured out a few days why Mary was going to be disappointed when she got older. When I realized that a pancake is literally a cake you make in a pan. Last year I came to the conclusion that Antarctica is named that because it's opposite of the Arctic. My ex cheating on me. What? No, she'd never do that to me, just because she hasn't been talking to me a lot in the past few weeks, and been hanging out with that mutual friend of ours after school a couple of days in the past week and not telling me about it, and been getting really odd when I bring that friend up in conversation, and getting super paranoid about me hanging out with other girls outside of school. Oh, okay. Guess this is somehow my fault. Huh. When people said they lived out in the sticks, I thought the sticks was a real place, like the Cotswolds or the Midlands. 28 before that particular penny dropped during a conversation with a client. What's the weirdest thing someone wanted to put in their will? I'm a qualified solicitor. My 2 favorites are a lady who wanted to create a trust fund of £100,000 for her pet fish. When I asked if it was a special kind of fish, she confirmed it was just a normal goldfish, but she wanted it to be fed fresh avocado every day and be looked after by a local dog walker after she died. She was absolutely serious. There was also another lady who confessed that she had a secret daughter and she wanted to leave said daughter some money and photographs without the rest of her family finding out. Even her husband doesn't know. That'll be a fun conversation when she passes away. My great-granddad has a clause in his will that stated something along the lines of, "If any of the beneficiaries decide to dispute the contents of the descendant's estate, their share becomes $1 and not a cent more." Seems like a pretty good way to maintain harmony among his survivors. I have this in my will. If someone isn't happy with my dying wish, they can politely say no and pass on it. If someone wants to be greedy, they get nothing but $1 minus postage and handling. My grandfather saved his kidney stone so that he could leave it to my cousin. They never really got along. When my grandfather passed, his will asked that I clean out his shed and I alone do it. I found green herb seeds, old-timey film reel-style adult films of undressed women, which was hilarious, and a bunch of other unsavory paraphernalia, 50s flick knives as well. So it's a bit like clearing his browser history for him, but cooler. A relative worked for a firm preparing wills and was confronted by an executor who had an edict to scatter the deceased's ashes from a microlight aircraft. He couldn't fly one. She kindly pointed out to him that the drafting said nothing about whether said microlight was in flight at the time of scattering. Okay, on the one hand, I despise honoring the letter but not the spirit of the law like this, and it's a little disrespectful. But then, whatever that relative was thinking, it's very, very inconvenient to go up and learn to fly a plane for this one single purpose, and I don't know how well they knew the deceased. Also, I don't love the idea of burning all that fuel for this one flying license that you'll never use again, and the deceased wasn't really in a position to complain. I had a Russian client, son of an oligarch. His father created a trust which provided dispositive provisions for if he was kidnapped and not found within a certain number of months. It freaked me out. I believe the will had similar language too, but I can't remember now. Now that I think about it, I believe there was a separate document, in addition to the trust, that provided that his will should be effective to the extent he was kidnapped and not recovered within a certain period of time. My friend's mother had in her will that the cat gets to live in my house alone until it expires. That cat lived there for a few years alone with a caregiver checking in on it. Yes, she was rich. I worked with plenty of estates and trust accounts over the years. This particular scenario isn't so much about the will itself being strange, but the circumstances that led up to the trust account being opened. I worked at a bank in the estates department. I was an administrator who managed the files, including encroachments upon the capital. Like, I want to take out some money now, please. I had this one account, multi-million-dollar trust for one single beneficiary, the son of the deceased. What's interesting is that the son killed the parents with a hammer in a grotesque and brutal fashion. He pled insanity. He'd call once a year from the penitentiary or mental hospital, requesting $50 for commissary, to buy chips and gum. The call was always very strange. He was very polite and sounded very medicated. The quality of the call was always very tinny, like he was far away from the phone. While the will might have been voided by their murder, my understanding is that in this case, since it was determined that the beneficiary was not of sound mind and was placed in an institution as a result of his actions, he was not in fact convicted. Thus, the terms of the trust would hold true. Had he been deemed guilty and of sound mind, the trust definitely would have been voided. Just last week, I handled a matter where the parents left millions in artwork to various people, wads of cash to various charities, and only left their kids, the family cats. Turns out they did it because the kids got them the cats to comfort the parents in their old age, and the parents fricking hated cats, but the kids wouldn't let them get rid of the animals. My mum put in her will that if she dies under any suspicious circumstances, that my sister and I won't be left anything. She watches a lot of true crime. She's an upper middle-class realtor. She makes money, but not enough money to be murdered over. Also, neither of us are murderers. Does it need to be said? This one isn't necessarily crazy, just an interesting glimpse into the mind of a kind old woman in her 90s. My aunt and uncle, both were more like parents and incredibly beautiful people, passed away within a few weeks of one another. When my uncle became ill, the aunt tried to work on a will with her long-term lawyer, but she was just kind of old and out of it. Her main concern the entire time was small knickknacks like a jar of pennies she wanted a distant cousin to have, or a used jacket from the 70s she bequeathed to a sister-in-law. It was quite touching how much time she actually spent considering each item and who would get it. Most of the items were used and didn't really hold any sentimental value. She just wanted them to go to good homes. When she passed away, everyone knew exactly who was getting each odd item. The real kicker is when the lawyer told the primary beneficiaries that she never actually got around to the bigger assets and all that jazz. She basically told the lawyer, "Pay for our funeral and anything we owe, and then family members X, Y, and Z can figure out the rest." It ended up being millions in homes, a lakefront property, jewelry, antique firearms, vehicles, life insurance policies, stocks, bonds, gold coins. Luckily, the family was very close and everything went off without a hitch. They were amazing people who wanted to keep family items in the family. They just didn't put that much weight on their incredible wealth. They also hid their wealth amazingly. We all knew that they were very comfortable, but no one had any idea that they were deep into 8-figure assets.
It's just funny to see a random niece get a set of plastic cups, worn dance shoes, and a check for 125 grand. Whenever I visited my old grandma in Nicaragua, I'd always see my aunts and uncles being weirdly nice to her, almost as if she was a famous person. People would be visiting her house to greet her and striking a conversation. One day, my mother walked into my grandma's room to have a conversation with her, and I remember the flight back, 3 or 4 hours after the conversation. I asked what it was about. She told me that grandma used to have children that almost never talked to her, and now that she's sickly, they're trying to act nice to get stuff out of her will. My grandma wanted to talk to my mum to ask what she wanted from the house. My mum was always the favorite growing up since she cherished grandma, and grandma wanted to pay her back for being a good daughter. My mum replied, "I don't want anything from you, I just want your love," and they both smiled at each other. Also, she wanted us to take a washing machine back home to sell it for cash, but we declined. And by the way, my grandma's still alive, she's not given up yet. Good on her for knowing that and giving credit where it's due. Now you just have to stop those other relatives from moving in there and getting real manipulative if it ever looks like the end is nigh. Sounds like it might eventually be the sort of thing that tears the family apart, but if the others are a bunch of vipers, good riddance. I read a lot of estate documents as part of my job. There is so much subtle shade in them occasionally, it can be pretty entertaining. One super wealthy lady had a huge section for the care and well-being of her pets, with primary and successor caretakers, a certain amount of money from the trust for care and feeding of each pet. One pet owner might receive $3,000 a month to take care of one of her pets after she passed, and certain stipulations on how they were to be cared for. While some might see it as excessive, the language and stipulations she had and how they were referred to showed that she really, really loved her pets. In that same will and trust, she also left a slew of people only $1 so that there would be no chance they could take the trust to probate court on the basis that they were merely forgotten. That part had so much subtle shade. A lot of, "they know what they did," and "they are well aware of their guilt in the matter." She split up about $2 million amongst 5 or 6 different animal rescues and animal welfare charities. It was about 200 pages long, and I swear I read the entire thing just for the sheer entertainment value. An aging woman my family knew left her house, which was very large and in a very affluent neighborhood, and estate to family friends for so long as her cats were alive and taken care of in said house. After the pets died, the house was to be sold and the remaining estate donated. The weird thing is, it's been like 20 years and the cats are still alive. Also, they've changed color. My great-uncle's official will gave the contents of his outhouse to the city council of a nearby town after they'd tried to take his land twice to build a new water treatment plant. He spent quite a few years fighting eminent domain claims and just wanted to give them something in return. As a joke, his kids boxed up all the books and magazines in the outhouse and dropped them off at City Hall. Not a will, but a deed. The city I work for was renovating a small park that was donated to the city in the 1910s. We went looking through the handwritten deed for easements or other restrictions and found that the family could claw the property back if the park were not perpetually provided with a fountain of pleasant running water fit for consumption by man and beast alike. The family still has descendants in town, so we installed a new water fountain with a dog bowl filler just to be safe. Here's one from one of my dad's law partners. He had a lady come in with an itemized list of books and wanted her will to contain all of the books and who'll get what based on her choosing. So basically, she decides who gets what specific books instead of letting her beneficiaries decide. The truly astonishing thing is how many books and how specific they get. According to Dad's law partner, her list is about 2,000 books to be divided amongst 30 people. She's apparently very specific and comes back at least once a year to add all the new books she's gotten. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My sister's mother-in-law is leaving her house to her 3 sons. If one wants to sell out his third of the house, he has to sell it to the other 2 brothers for $1. They can sell it if all 3 agree. I think she wants her sons to use it like a cottage, a place where they all visit and stay for a while. 2 of the sons live on lakes nearby, so they would never use it as such, and the 3rd son lives with his mum in the house.
He does take on a lot of the care responsibilities of his mum. She's 93, so that's nice. The other two brothers have done most of the home maintenance for decades, including weekly mowing and cleaning, and they still help in the care. When she dies, which unfortunately could be very soon, the third son might not move out. He could freeload in that house forever, and his brothers would have to share in the tax payments and upkeep if they want to maintain their inheritance. A Furby collection from models collected in the late 90s. They were convinced they'd retain future value. This was in 2011. I'm the executor of my grandmother's will. I'll get the house and everything in it and a share of life insurance that's split 3 ways between myself, my sister, and my mum. My mum has always said that all that my dad, my grandmother's son-in-law, would like to have is some table. Well, in the will, there's like a whole paragraph that states how my dad gets nothing. He doesn't lay a finger on anything in the house or any money. How my dad is basically worthless and deserves nothing, and how he was a crap dad, and she begrudgingly has my mum in the will. Thanks, Grandma, I'll appreciate the awkwardness. Good God. And to my favorite grandchild, not the other one, I leave the majority of my possessions as long as he keeps the worthless sack of crap who spawned him away from all my stuff. My daughter can have 1 or 2 things, I guess. Same energy, to be honest. My grandpa gave me all of his tools, which sounds dumb, but we're in the same trade, and it was a real life changer. It included a lift and his old shop truck, so I pretty much got everything to start my own shop, apart from the building. Also, a pretty good chunk of change and his dog Tanner, as long as I made sure his live-in girlfriend at the time got nothing at all, and I told my uncle he was fat and his wife was going to leave him if she couldn't find his pecker. There was literally a script inside the will. It all went smoothly, and my uncle lost weight, and Janice is a jerk, and it turned out Tanner is kind of a jerk too, but it's okay, because my grandpa was kind of a jerk. A good one, but still sort of a jerk. They have the same mustache and eyebrows now, so I come home from work every now and again and get stared down by my grandpa while I go number 2. I work for a will writer and trust specialist in the UK, currently studying towards my TEP. One of our earlier clients passed recently. Turns out the man she left almost everything to, including the residue of her estate, which was considerable, was her regular taxi driver. She also named him as her executor. He had no clue. The woman named as her executor and main beneficiary of her previous 2 wills, a close friend of many years, was understandably flabbergasted and contested the will. We responded to her solicitor's Lark vs. Nergus request and informed the taxi driver, who didn't even know our client had passed away. And the will was upheld. The aforementioned friend was left a legacy of £5,000 if I remember correctly, but her nose was clearly out of joint. Bonus observation, it takes a lot less than £5,000 being up for grabs to make families turn against each other. It can get really nasty. One of the most startling things I've learned in my short time in this business. I had the first son, so my dad decided to leave me more. Except he did the math wrong and it came out to 105%. He had dementia. Kind of related, I worked on a divorce between a couple who fought over every single thing in the house, separating pillows and such. They were left 52 gallons of vanilla extract by their grandmother. In a secondary proceeding, he was awarded all but 5 gallons. 2 weeks later, he sent a case of samples in Ziploc baggies to our office, along with a request to subpoena a urine test from his ex-wife to prove she whittled in the jugs before he picked them up. We never needed to, as she screamed in court that she did that in full just like he weed all over her during their marriage. They were nice. The same couple went to court for nearly 2 years over a Beanie Baby collection. They had 3 kids. My vindictive grandmother left my aunt $20 as a reminder of the $20 my aunt stole from her once. One client left $100,000 to his 2 cats so they could maintain their current lifestyle. My grandpa put in his will a chocolate bar for every one of his grandkids. Well, I have like 12 cousins and they're very difficult to track down. All of his estates and money he had in his will was at a standstill for months because they couldn't find my couple of cousins. I had to show the court that we put in effort to hire someone to track them down. The lawyer that was helping execute the will was blown away that someone had allowed this to be written, and was very vocal about why he'd highly suggest not to track them down. But I'm not complaining because I got a Toblerone out of the deal. I was forced to write a will in my early 20s due to the health insurance I get at work, and amongst my sensible stuff, the in-house lawyer said it was totally okay for this clause to be added. My funeral wishes are that I be buried in a coffin which has been spring-loaded, such that opening the coffin would cause alarm to future archaeologists. Then a bunch of addendums about how if I didn't have the money for this, I'd be cremated and have my ashes scattered in a specific place. I was always curious if I could request that my head be removed from my body before burial in the case of a zombie outbreak so I'd do minimal damage to future generations. My old landlord took 2 years to boot me out because her mother who owned the place died and she just wanted to sell the place. But her mother's carer said the mother verbally promised the house to her. Even though it was not written in the will, it still took 2 years of fighting in court to clear things up. No, the carer didn't get it in the end, even after all the appeals. In my mum's will, which I've seen, she's left me the kitchen table and chairs. She lives on a South Manchester council estate. My brother gets the sideboard. Wow, lucky! Imagine owning a table! Maybe if my parents pass away prematurely, I could own mine someday. Living that high life, in an apartment, with furniture, and something other than garbage bags for curtains. My great-grandmother left most of her money to a local donkey sanctuary? No ma'am, in order to bequeath something, you actually have to own it. My client wanted her ashes spread at the restaurant on the beach where she met her husband. Ah, that's really sweet. Not for everyone else getting Linda in their butthole, it isn't. I work in probate. The oddest thing I've seen in a will is to euthanize their beloved horse, have it cremated, and its ashes scattered with the deceased. Luckily for her horse, she named a horse that was already dead, so the one she got afterwards lived to see another farm. Me and a friend from middle school have an agreement that he gets $10 out of my estate. I also want all beneficiaries notified by a mysterious man in a dark suit, preferably on a dark rainy day. Lawyer here, probably the woman who wanted to gift the frozen splooge of her dead dog. Lots of people sending their friends and family on weird errands to spread their ashes, leaving money for people to take trips and spread them around the world with. Pet trusts are another fun one, leaving a whole whack of money in a trust to be used for the care of the pet during their life. However, my favorite ever, that I obviously didn't draft, was a lawyer who left the bulk of his estate, millions in today's dollars, to whatever Toronto area woman had the most children at a specific date some year in the future. I recall the winner had 10 kids. When a dad died, he set up financial installments, so as long as his daughter remains under a certain weight, dude was controlling her diet from beyond the grave. A famous case most law students read is of a mother who left a ton to her son, provided he married a Jewish woman. Well, he was already married to a non-Jewish woman. Big mess. My grandfather left me $1. He had dementia and confused my dad ripping him off with me. He left the rest of the family between $100,000 and a few million each. They all said they felt horrible because they knew the details, but not horrible enough to give up any of their share. The way I see it is that it was never my money to begin with, so it's not a loss. I'm just glad my sister got $100K. She needed it more than any of those others. A good clause is always, for reasons known to them, which is will speak for, you've gone and messed up, jerk, I don't forgive you. In my own will, I've left my father the contents of my kitchen trash can at the time of my passing, for reasons known to him. He could very well outlive me. His side of the family lives forever, like reaching 100 or more isn't unheard of for them. I take after my mother's side, which has significant heart disease. I understand I could follow either, both, or neither, but I could also just get hit by a bus tomorrow and die unexpectedly. I figured it was the safest to actively disinherit him rather than stay silent and assume I'll outlive him. Worked with a client who wanted language that her cats would be euthanized and buried with her. The moral part just went over her head, so he had to explain why legally we couldn't do that. One of the few clients who ever got under my skin. What's it like dating a sociopath? I had a friend who married one. There were no warning signs. From my perspective, he was genuinely a decent guy. Had a sales job, and I do sales, so we got along. Then it was seriously the night of the wedding he got really controlling. It was like a light switch flipped. They went on their honeymoon the next week and she called me halfway through thinking she had made a mistake. She said he just picked at her for saying the wrong thing, and his idea of the future made her sound like a slave. I didn't think too much about it. A lot of people have fights on their honeymoon. She got pregnant like a month into it. Then he moved her back east so they could live with his mum, even though he was supposed to be making a lot of money. She quit calling me much after the wedding. I assumed it was a newlywed plus baby planning thing, so I didn't think too much about it. Then we noticeably drifted, and I didn't know until years later that it was because he got mad whenever she talked to other people. So yeah, he moved her out of state, got her pregnant, and had 2 other families on the side. She finally got out of it, messed her up for a long time. A friend of mine dated a diagnosed sociopath and said it was frustrating because there wasn't any logic behind her attraction to him. She realized he wasn't good to her, but she couldn't stop going back to him. She described him as both the best thing and worst thing in her life when she was with him. Oh, he was a classic, into animal torture and stuff like that. The way he got to talking endlessly about animal torture was by pretending he felt bad for it and looking for sympathy. Like, I can't believe I did that. I feel so bad. He kept mentioning it so much. He thought it was funny when me or the baby had pain. At one point, he told me that it was so long ago that by now, I should also think it was funny that he had gotten my blood and my pieces of flesh on him. He said that me having empathy was proof that I was mentally ill because empathy doesn't exist. You just learn in your teens that there's consequences for being bad to other people. He also said that nobody cares about women, they're like steak in the supermarket, and that when he saw a woman in the streets, he thought about committing the unspeakable act. He is incredibly charismatic, and the police said that I made a false report. He's still getting back at me for leaving through the legal system. My lord. If any of our viewers have ever dated someone like this, you have my deepest sympathy because it sounds truly horrific. And those of us who have yet to hit the sociopath in our dating lives can thank our lucky stars. Disclaimer, I am not nor have I ever been in a romantic relationship with my brother. I misread the post. However, I have lived with my sociopath brother and can relay why it would probably be a nightmare to date someone like him. He's my twin. Things happened when we were little, I couldn't have linked up then, but I most certainly do now. As twins, we obviously got 2 of everything. He'd destroy his, take mine and then say I destroyed mine to get his thing because it was better somehow. He hugged the family cat so hard it panted when he let it go. Every time. Once, he mysteriously found the cat with a broken leg and decided not to tell Mum. He was just constantly trying to cause chaos, pinning everyone in the house against each other. He'd start arguments, seemingly for the fun of it, and he'd always find a way to slip into the background while we screamed at each other. His worst offense was when he cut himself on the leg with a razor and told Mum and Dad I'd made him do it. My parents nearly got divorced because of him. Then they later got divorced for other reasons. He told me a while later that he lied about everything. He liked doing that, messing things up and only telling me. I was branded as a liar for most of my childhood and no one really trusted anything I said because of him, so he took all the more delight in confiding in me because he knew what it would do. He lives with my dad now and I haven't spoken to him in 4 years. But I do have a fun story if people ask who the evil twin is, I guess. I dated one and it was traumatizing. I felt like I was losing my mind from the casual cruelty and gaslighting. Took forever for me to trust obvious truths again, since he was so skilled at maliciously twisting them. 0.03 out of 10 I would not recommend. Yes, he admitted his diagnosis proudly, at least to me. He was very troubled. I was only with him 8 months, but those 8 months were the worst of my life. He seemed happy to discover I didn't have stable housing. He asked if I'd like to move in. I said no, so he started causing problems with the people I was crashing with. I didn't realize this until later that he was the one who got me kicked out. Once I had no choice but to stay with him, the hotels, or the streets, he laughed and said he's breaking his lease. Maybe if I'd done what he said faster, I'd be able to stay. But that I could sleep in his basement if I liked. He'd do weird crap like that. Make me wait outside of bars, his jobs, his friends' houses. It was this whole thing he'd make me do, especially if the weather was poor. When he drank, it was worse. I'd sleep in the bathroom if he was on the sauce to get away from him. If I didn't, he'd attack me when he blacked out. He's wanted for murder in another country now. No clue where he is, but I'll randomly get contacted by him. It's been years, but he still does it. All he says is, I love you. Once he got into my email and changed my name to I love you. I know 100% that it's him. I've seen and been through a lot of messed up stuff in my life. It is what it is. But that man takes the frickin' cake for the most awful experiences in my entire life. There are people I meet or see on TV that have the exact look in their eyes or voice pattern as him, despite looking nothing like him. I avoid those people like the plague or sprint to turn the TV off when they appear. It's like they over-enunciate certain points of words yet have a monotone voice. The latter especially. It's like they're parroting a human and they're not actually one. One thing he always did was watch YouTube videos and practice in the mirror on how to look happy, sad, or concerned. It was insane. Everyone thought he was the greatest guy on earth. His mother tried to warn me that he'd kill me. It was messed up. Yes, I dated a narcissistic sociopath. It was terrible. It left permanent scars. It took time, but I now realize that everything was a lie. Well, his name was correct, but what he thought, felt, did, his plans and his history, I knew none of those things. He's a complete stranger and I never knew him at all. I'm doing fine now, although once in a while I'll stop and shake my head because I feel so goddamn dumb. I don't imagine that it's common for sociopaths to get diagnosed as such. They tend to live in denial. They don't think they have issues worth exploring. Yes, I dated one and it was the worst experience of my life. By the time it was over, multiple years, I had no idea who he was. That's what it was like. This is very true. Why would someone who has as little regard as we've seen in some of these stories ever care enough about how much damage they do to take the first steps to treatment? Do any of our commenters know of stories of people like this bettering themselves? Sound off. There wasn't any diagnosis, but I was casually with a guy who was sending up some pretty serious red flags, and it suddenly clicked that he was a sociopath. No empathy, would absolutely lie to people's faces, huge plans that went nowhere, nothing was ever his fault, rules were for other people. When I drifted away from him or hung out with someone else, he'd start putting lots of effort in again. And of course, there was cheating, lying, among other things. Luckily for me, I'd recognized it early, and I realized I needed to be careful about how I went about detaching myself from him. So here's what I did, and hopefully it can help someone. I never actually broke things off with him or told him we were done. Obviously, this only works if you're casual, but maybe some variation of it could work. So an example would be that when he asked me for something, I knew he wanted it right then and there. So whenever he contacted me to ask for it, I'd say, sure, that sounds great. I get off work in 3 hours and I'll come over with it right after that. He'd say, no, never mind. I'd act like I was disappointed about it, so he thought he had successfully punished me. He thought that I was still on the hook. I'd do this over and over until he stopped thinking of me as someone he could get things from. It took a while and a lot of acting upset when he'd berate me or snap at me. I specifically remember sitting in his room while he yelled at me about where I put my purse down, thinking, okay, remember Vi, this is very upsetting, looks sad, but it did work without him going to any extremes, and we lived in the same building, so it was hard to just avoid him altogether. Obviously, your mileage may vary. Yep, by far the hardest experience of my life. I was with him for nearly a year, 6 years ago, still working on recovery today. Tried to separate me from my friends and family, made me feel responsible for him emotionally and financially. One of the first things he did after about a week of dating was convince me to pay for his $400 phone bill so he could have his phone switched back on and stay in contact with me. That was only the beginning. I lost all of my self-worth. By the end, I felt completely crazy. It's insane what prolonged exposure to gaslighting will do to a person. I ended up dropping out of uni because he would sabotage me at every turn. I'll never forget when I was working on a major project and he'd keep walking past me calling me a fricking B-word and spitting on my piece. I was the only one working, and supporting 2 people on a crap hospitality wage is hard enough, and then adding in about $300 a week of a green herb addiction. If he didn't have that stuff, he'd lose his crap. He'd throw things, smash things. It was safer for me to keep him dosed up, and in turn, I smoked a crapload to escape the reality of the situation. I finally got out when I found out that he had working girls in the house and in my bed. I finally opened up to my friends what had been happening, and they got me out of there. It was messed up, but I tried to see it in a positive light. I've learned and gained massive self-esteem since this happened, and I find I can easily detect sociopathic and narcissistic personalities, not people now. I still get super triggered by things, especially guys yelling or showing aggression. I still get annoyed at myself for breaking down in these situations, but each time it happens, I feel myself heal just a little bit. I see it as a wound reopening, but then the scar tissue builds up, making me stronger each time. Sorry for such a long rant. Seeing this question hit me, and it feels good to get a bit of stuff off my chest. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was married to one. It was awful. We had a child and he cheated while I was pregnant with a woman I specifically said, "I don't trust her, please avoid being alone with her too," when she joined my group. Other friends basically invited her in. He was verbally and mentally awful. He told me no one would want me because I was a young single mum, so I may as well come home and just let him cheat with whoever he felt like cheating with. I moved across the country to escape his insanity. The best way I learned to deal with him is to ignore him and not give a crap. It messed with his ego big time. He really doesn't know how to deal with someone who actually gives zero shots about him. He'd try to tell me about whatever was going on in his life and I'd say, "Why are you telling me this? I don't care. Don't speak to me unless it's about your son." He kidnapped my child during one of the visits. Because our divorce was final in our home state, nothing could be done. It took me 2 years of fighting to win full sole custody of my son, who's now grown and doesn't have much to do with his dad. There's of course a lot more to the story. Psychological warfare and such. He tried to make me think I was going crazy when I started to become suspicious. He tried to torture me for 18 years. I haven't spoken to him in 5 years and I feel free. He's been told that if he so much as tries to speak to me at events for my son, like graduation, college graduation, military basic training graduation, that I'll walk away. I have nothing to say to the man and he has nothing of worth to say to me. My son learned on his own what kind of person his dad is and is remarkably well-adjusted and full of empathy. Traumatic. I'm in therapy, but I'm scared of people now. I don't know if I want to get married or have kids. I beat myself up for it because there were so many signs that he was that way. But I still wanted him. Even a few years after we first broke up, I ended up catching herpes. He never cared about me and only cared about himself. He used me. I got really mad at myself when I think about it. Even typing this out, my anxiety is slightly hitting me. I learned that I was in love with the idea of being in love and that my self-esteem was low. It's probably going to be a long time before I trust people again. One of my biggest fears is falling into it again. And even worse, not leaving. I'm thankful that I have friends and family that help me. I don't feel alone. I feel love all the time. One thing that's been very telling in these stories has not just been of the hard, scary times these people go through during dating these people, but the seemingly long-lasting damage to their victims' self-esteem and future relationships. I really have no words. My first boyfriend told me on our first date that he was a sociopath and, "I don't feel anything, but I sure know I like you." And because I was 16 and naive, I completely fell for it. Q being manipulated into doing the deed, telling him I struggled with my relationship with food and body image only to be told I was flabby afterwards, and all the exhausting mind games. Even through all of that and more, I still utterly adored him and repressed all of my instinctual feelings that were telling me to leave. Something I still feel dumb about. I honestly think I was just a toy for him to manipulate and hurt, something he made sure to tell me about after our relationship ended. The way his face would change from loving to like someone I didn't know was kind of terrifying, really. It all messed me up pretty badly, and I still find it hard to trust people. Yes, I dated one briefly, and she nearly ruined my life. I broke up with her when I realized she was mentally unstable after about 5 dates. 6 months later, I was coming home from a party when I found her waiting half undressed in my lobby, asking to please come upstairs. I let her, she disrobed, refused to leave, threatened to smash my things, and when I removed her from the apartment, accused me of attacking her. I was arrested, lost a job I was about to start, and lost 6 months in savings. The night before the hearing, she called me. I was smart enough not to pick up, and the voicemail convinced the prosecutor to drop the case. 3 years later, I got a call from someone claiming to be her husband. She'd tried the same thing with him, but he had been dumb enough to marry her, and then dumb enough to pick up the phone after she had accused him. He ended up facing felony charges, lost his medical license, and paid half the value of his home to get rid of her. She'd also apparently attacked his kids, while he had been restrained from being in his own home of 20 years based on her accusations and their 4-week marriage. Clinical psych grad student here. There's going to be a lot of sensationalized responses on here that paint a picture of sociopaths, which is either antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, that is violent and demented. The reality is that sociopaths, just like mentally healthy people, come in all shapes and sizes. Violent tendencies can exist, but aren't necessarily advantageous for people. Many sociopaths end up becoming successful doctors, lawyers, politicians, and most of them don't commit acts of violence or overt aggression. One caveat is that antisocial personality disorder is characterized by acts of criminal or otherwise delinquent behavior, narcissists not quite as much. And yes, I was romantically involved with a sociopath. Ultimately, being with him felt like I'd been thrown into the rapids. I felt disoriented, confused, and betrayed after every serious conversation about his treatment of me. Somehow it was my fault, or criticizing him too much. He refused to apologize and claimed that he wanted an apology for mistreatment and it was manipulation on my part. I told him once that being with him felt like he was holding me by the throat over a great precipice. I didn't want to hold on to him, but if I let go, I feared that I'd fall. He had constructed a world around me in which my reality was no longer real, in which I was never the victim but the ungrateful charity case, and in which he constantly was inventing new ways to torment me psychologically and intimidate me physically. The tumult, the rapids, were ultimately a script of rapidly oscillating states of being. He'd apologize and promise that he'd change. He'd cry and beg for me not to leave him. If I tried to make him leave, he'd pivot to threats or demean me. Everything happened on his terms, even if it didn't seem that way. Outwardly, he appeared to be a patient, kind, and charismatic partner. He was conventionally attractive, intellectually gifted, and socially adored. His views on life were reasonable and measured, and his style of rhetoric is, to this day, one of the most engaging and convincing of anyone I'd ever known. The acts of cruelty and humiliation were rare at first, growing to a crescendo during times in my life when I was the most vulnerable. I lost my best friend. The attacks escalated, then I got a new job and the attacks declined. I left my job and they escalated again. I found a new job and there we were, back to celebrating again. When he was good, he was so good. I'd start to believe that I must have been too hard on him. After all, things only got bad when I was already doing poorly, managing grief, loss, and depression. When I was succeeding, he was succeeding with me. So it seemed reasonable to me, for a while at least, that he was right when he said I was just projecting my inner turmoil onto him. I believed him for a while, but that mask just can't stay on. Eventually, things are too good for too long and he couldn't have that. He always needed to be one step ahead of me. He always needed to have the upper hand, and he always needed to use it to drag me to the edge of the abyss and hold me over while I desperately clutched and grabbed at the arm that held me, begging him not to let go. I now know that this is typical of narcissistic bad actors. I know that his moves were calculated and methodical. I know that he attacked me when I was already down because it was the easiest to manipulate my worldview during those times, and to create a dynamic in which I was so afraid to lose him amongst the other losses that I'd forgive him for whatever he'd done, even if what he'd done was slowly boring a hole into me, removing pieces of myself that I'd left defenseless to exploit. I know now that the true trap is the poison in the sugar. I know that it's the sweetness, the overtures when you're stronger that truly ensnare and contort. I know that it wasn't my fault. It had never been my fault. The red flags I'd seen from the start were warnings I should have heeded, not forgiven, and that in robbing me of myself, in repeatedly gaining and abusing my trust and affection, he was whittling me away from the inside out until I felt more like scattered debris of myself than an entire person capable of walking away when I first realized I had to. I tried to leave him 10 times. It took me 9 months after the attacks first started to get out. 6 after the first serious events started to unravel. I didn't think that sort of thing could happen to me because, well, I'd studied this sort of thing. I knew the signs academically. I was so certain I'd recognize them. I'm a strong, outspoken, and almost aggressively independent person, someone you'd think incapable of victimizing. But there it was. It happened to me. And in having it happened, I understand how truly insidious this kind of thing is. I understand why women can't or don't leave. I understand why I was so wrong to think that they were weak for not fighting or running away. If one of these people is smart, like my partner, they don't just break you down. It doesn't happen all at once. Instead, you become eroded. You're contorted and compromised so slowly that you don't realize what's happening until you've already been ensnared. He never had to lay a single hand on me to be the single worst experience of my entire life. He didn't have to hit me even once to make me afraid of him, alienated from my own body and distanced from my true sense of self. Beyond the obvious words of wisdom that I'm sure most people will impart in this thread, I'd just like to leave you with this, if you're still with me. I'll give you bitter pills and sugar coating. The pills are harmless, the poison is in the sugar. What made a Disneyland mascot break character? I worked the parade route from time to time, making sure kids didn't dart out in front of floats and such. People like me would often be playful with cast members along the parade route, winking and making silly faces. There was one day where Baloo came up to me mid-dance and proceeded to bow to me. Baloo also happened to be wearing some sort of crown or hat thing with a star on top. Baloo probably wasn't aware of how tall that actually made them. Baloo managed to smack me right in the mouth with that star, cutting it open and giving me a fat lip. Fairly certain I heard Baloo audibly gasp when they stood upright again. Paw to mouth. He immediately stopped dancing, just stared at me as I bled. They tried to grab my hands and pull me to them, but their handler came and ushered them along. Whoops! I auditioned to be a face character, and Disneyland made it to the stage where they run through scenarios of unruly guests, rude comments, etc., and you have to respond and come up with responses in character. My dance teacher was also a face more than 20 years ago, and she had all kinds of stories of people trying to reach up her skirt. She was Pocahontas mainly. In the end, I'm glad I didn't make it through. At the time, it was barely above minimum wage, which was like $6.75 an hour or something like that. I chaperoned a gentleman with special needs to Disneyland as part of a group tour. When our group of special needs individuals met the characters, they were all absolutely incredible with our people. Minnie flirted with my friend I took, Merida flirted with me, but the best of all was Cruella de Vil. Normally, she insults who she takes pictures with. With us, she managed to stay in character but not say anything actually mean. She said to one guy with a cane, "Ah, I like your cane. You can use it to beat the little ones out of your way." Disneyland used to have a Tarzan character, but you don't see him anymore. Since the characters are always expected to pose for photos and selfies, and Tarzan wore nothing but a loincloth, women were just constantly grabbing the character's butt when they got close. So the park just quit that character. After some confirmation of the bad behavior, there are still some recent Tarzan sightings. It appears Disney paused the character and redesigned his loincloth costume into one more like a pair of shorts and a jungle vine sash. Apparently women are still grabby, but the costume department tried to make it a little less easy. If they can't break character, does Rapunzel get to hit the preverts with a frying pan? The narrator has read ahead a little, and after seeing how many stories of people behaving inappropriately with these poor costumed employees there are, I kinda wish that appropriate characters like Rapunzel, Mulan, and Kim Possible, who kick a lot of butt, could in fact do so with full approval from their bosses. On a Disney cruise, I met a guy who looked exactly like Peter Pan. When we asked him, he said, "Nope, Peter Pan has brown eyes," or something like that. The next day, when we went to get a picture with Peter, he got super close and whispered, "See? Peter has brown eyes." Hands down, the best Disney employee I've ever met. This guy played Pluto as well. I watched Jack Sparrow talking to a kid when the kids started chucking up everywhere. Jack then said, "Too much of the old apple juice, eh, mate?" Been there myself. Even ran out once. All the while, the kid was just projectile spewing everywhere. I just want to say that there's a video on YouTube of some meathead trash-talking Gaston about how he could beat him in a push-up match. They go at it, the meathead gives up, and Gaston cranks out a few more one-handed push-ups just to rub it in. Talk about character. A bit late, but I did the college program at Walt Disney World. Never saw a character break when I worked audience control for parades. Definitely saw a few fully costumed characters chuck up in their heads. And Prince Naveen once got heat exhaustion and managed to leave the parade route fully in character. Once the parade was over, we saw him in the back almost completely passed out. Typically, the parade will speed up to double time if a character actor is in distress. I was at Disneyland once, and the Sheriff of Nottingham was fake menacing a child. He reached out to touch the kid's balloon, and for some reason it popped. The character actor was clearly stunned. A new balloon appeared less than 30 seconds later. I remember being in Disneyland Paris when I was 9 and had just gotten a baby Simba plush, which I bought to dinner in one of those character meeting restaurants, where the characters come to your table. Most characters pretended to coo at and tickle Simba. The Sheriff of Nottingham kidnapped Simba. I, of course, got him back. It just took a dramatic fake tug-of-war between Mr. Incredible and the Sheriff of Nottingham to do it. Seriously, these guys are so good at what they do. I saw a recent video on YouTube of Ray talking to this little girl, and her dad just started filming. Apparently, the story the little girl was telling got Ray laughing so hard she had to turn her face away and eventually got up and run away because she couldn't stop laughing at whatever the little girl's story was. Okay, in the comments it's explained and she said, "My daughter busted me out for giving her too many donuts and then told Ray she threw up and then persisted to share how she can potty by herself. Right after sharing Secrets of the Force, a complete 180 in the conversation. That's kids for ya. Super adorable." I have a close friend who was Woody for a while at Disneyland. He said that one time a float caught on fire during the show and they had to play it off completely in character. They danced around it and had to quickly get it backstage to deal with the problem. He said they played it off well enough that no one seemed to notice and there wasn't any panic or stampeding. He said he'd never seen an instance of anyone breaking character because everyone was very well trained, and there's always at least 6 or so cameras that you can see at all times. I also one time offered an unopened water bottle to an employee when it was 100 degrees, and he said if anyone at Disney saw that, he'd be fired. They can't take anything from guests. He also mentioned the cameras constantly, watching both crew and patrons. One time, an acrobat fell off a float, face planted into the ground, and knocked herself out. They had to surround her in a circle and dance in sync as someone dragged the body away. They played it off very well, and apparently nobody noticed. I've seen articles that face characters can leave at any time if their treatment is bad, using in-character excuses. Costume characters always have an attendant with them to control unruly guests. If you behave like that to a costume character, you deserve to be kicked out of Disney. I worked at the Disney store in late '87 and '88 in Orange County, California. I think at the time it was like one of only a handful of stores open. The back of the store had a big screen where we constantly played some Disney video. Every once in a while, the biggest, muscular, blackest, gayest dude would come in and kindly request we play anything Winnie the Pooh related. He'd then proceed to prance around the store, he came in the evenings towards closing, and sing the Tigger parts of either dialogue or any song. Turns out he was one of the Tiggers at Disneyland. The guy just loved being Tigger. I'm glad that he did. I can't help but think this sounds like a really tough job where you're expected to give 1,000% all of the time for what seems like minimum wage, judging by the early stories. I'm happy that some people seem to thrive in the line of work. My cousin used to do this when I was a kid. We'd always go try to find her on days we knew she was working. She mostly played Pooh Bear. She'd never say out loud, "Hi Jill," using my name, but she'd get very animated and jump around to give us hugs. Occasionally she'd still say things like, "Oh, I have a rumbly in my tummy." I thought I was the coolest kid because I knew Pooh Bear. I wasn't a character, but I was a cast member. I was walking from backstage into the park. If you've seen the transitions, they're S-shaped to keep people from peeking in. I was pushing a handcart. The ones we used had 2 long supports sticking out from the end. As I was going through, Winnie the Pooh was walking in from the other side. I hit him or her square in the leg with one of the poles. Hearing Winnie the Pooh say, "Oh, frick," was pretty damn funny. A few days ago, my sister and her friend went to the new Galaxy's Edge area. My sister's friend was about 6'1" and had never seen Star Wars. We were walking around and Chewbacca ran up to her, he was around the same height, and hugged her. Then he put his hand above his head, showing that they were both tall. She was super embarrassed, and while they were walking away, he did that fist pump thing. Since then, we refer to her as Chewbacca's girlfriend. Seriously, the cutest thing ever. I couldn't even get the zombies at Halloween Horror Nights to break character. Asked one where the restroom was and he flung his arms in the proper direction and went, "Ugh." Pretty hilarious. I worked character department at Magic Kingdom many years ago. I can't remember breaking character, but I do remember working the restaurant at the Contemporary for dinners. One time we had a Make-A-Wish kid as a guest, and they were just the most awesome kid, and it was just heartbreaking to know why they were there. So our lead let us do a group hangout with the kid for something like an hour in costume, playing and running around and having fun. You could never play like that in the parks, you'd start a riot. No consequences for us though, we all just hoped that we made the little kid happy. Bonus fun fact, the Goofy costume for the Electric Light Parade was worn by a float driver. And because the driver was seated, there were no pants for that costume, just the glittery top and head and gloves. They do not break character. My best childhood friend is a face character. During the interviews, they bring you through a ton of challenging scenarios, like kids with lost parents, kids who act mean, And if you break character, there's 1,000 other people of your exact height and hair color ready to play the character better than you. They even made my friend do an impression of a Disney character without speaking. She just had to be able to portray the essence of the character, and if they couldn't guess who she wrote down, her interview was over. They're incredibly serious about staying in character. Anytime something bad enough would happen that they should break character, their handler would just guide them away and handle it themselves. Bonus info, she isn't allowed to tell anyone who she plays except family and close friends, or post anything about work on social media for the entirety of her time at Disney, or else she'll be fired. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I worked closely with them as a photographer. Disney performers are trained to never break character for whatever reason. They have ways of signaling their character attendant that they're in distress, and it's generally up to the character attendant to avoid any weird or uncomfortable situations. As far as these weird situations go, they do get people that stalk them in the park, like some people get in line multiple times to get a photo with a specific performer. That weird side of Disney fanatics are something else. Yeah, I heard of one performer who had to get a restraining order after one of her fans got a full back tattoo of her. The tattoo was not of her in character. I don't work for Disney, but I work for Party Princess Productions that does Disney birthday parties on the weekends. I was Darth Vader in Malibu for this kid's birthday. It was only him, which was rare, but we had fun. We played lightsaber hide-and-go-seek, where when he finds me, we duel. I had him practice the Force on me, helping him focus and toss me to the wall. In the middle of all the fun, the kid started coughing. It was subtle at first and then got worse. Got to the point where he's not breathing and he's not moving. I took off my helmet and was about to perform CPR when the mother came out with his inhaler. She told me he can't play anymore because he has bad asthma and it gets worse the more active he is. I put the helmet back on and played things off. We opened presents together and I left. To this day, I hate that mother for watching me play with her kid, knowing his condition and not telling me a word until the poor guy nearly suffocated. I called my boss and told her that I need to know all medical conditions before the party right away from now on. I hope that kid had fun. I still feel horrible for almost killing him from teaching him the ways of the dark side. I wouldn't say break, but I was a lifeguard and I had to ban this kid from going down the water slide. Every single time I told him he had to be feet first, and every time he said, okay, but he kept going head first, and it got to the point where the other kids saw him and were copying him. So I banned him, he left and cried to mum and dad, and I had to explain to them why. They left and cried to my coordinator, and they came back saying it wasn't very magical of me. I explained after several times of this kid not listening, other kids were copying him. In any case, I got a stern talking to about being the nice lifeguard who explains versus the mean lifeguard who just yells orders. Later that day, the kid was running across the deck despite several requests not to, tripped and ate concrete. Oh well, don't hate me because I don't feel bad. Oof. So to stay on topic, I don't know if this is some sort of special lifeguard character that plays at Disneyland or if you just have to maintain a character that feels cartoony. But whether they are caricature or not, listen to your safety officials, people. They're there for a reason. My neighbor, he died a couple of years ago, so I'm safe telling this, worked at Disney for years. One day he was stocking shelves in a gift shop and came around the corner and nearly ran into none other than Paul and Linda McCartney. Before he could stop himself, he loudly exclaimed, "Holy crap, it's the McCartneys!" He immediately realized how big of a breach of Disney cast member etiquette he had committed and turned 12 shades of red, but before anything bad could happen, Paul and Linda just smiled and laughed and introduced themselves. Apparently, they were wonderfully laid back about such things and quite used to surprised reactions when people recognized them in public. He didn't get into any trouble. His boss saw the whole episode and thought it was hilarious. And I think they both signed a hat or something for him while they were checking out. A face performer broke character for my husband and I. I won't say which park, but we took a trip to Disneyland about 2 months after we lost our son. That was our first kid. Our entire nursery was Neverland and Peter Pan themed. We always wanted to take him to Disney, have him meet Peter. Well, he couldn't. I got a memorial tattoo, an exact replica of my son's hospital ink handprint, and we got a picture of Peter Pan with the tattoo. We were alone with him and his handler. I tearfully explained the situation before asking him to pose with my arm. He took lots of photos with my tattoo and us. And afterwards, he hugged me tight, told me he was proud of me and God bless us, and he was so sorry for our loss. It was amazing, emotional, and I'll never forget that Peter Pan was proud of me for finding the strength to keep on living. It honestly meant the world. I'm so glad he broke character. I'll always treasure those photos and that memory. One of the traditions of our college sorority back in the 80s was that the day after initiation, all the new members and their big sisters would go to Disneyland, sporting their new letters to wear. One of the costumed characters in the parade kept throwing gang signs or something at us, and we were so confused. Turns out it was one of our sisters who had to work that day. She was trying to do our sorority's hand symbol, but with her hands in oversized furry gloves, it didn't show up so well. My wife was goofy for a semester in college. She accidentally ripped the feeding tube out of a Make-A-Wish kid in a wheelchair, going in for a hug with poor visibility from the costume. Luckily, all wandering costumed characters have uniformed handlers to assist, but it's kind of hard to stay in character as Goofy after something like that. She felt terrible and was traumatized for weeks. The kid was fine, at least from that incident. It was a hassle to mitigate, but no medical damage resulted from it. I went once, and a man was getting handsy with Cinderella, so she excused herself to the bathroom and ran to a security guard. When I was 6 or so, I went to Disney World with my mum and aunt and cousins. I really wanted Captain Hook's autograph, but per his character, he wasn't supposed to give it. I started crying over it, and my mum went and asked him again, nicely I hope, and told him I was very upset over it. He signed my book even though he wasn't supposed to, and I always thought that was neat. So, to Captain Hook from 1989 or so, if you're out there, thanks, and I hope you didn't get in trouble for that. They don't break character. If a nuke fell on Disney, they'd be ushering you into the bomb shelters as Aladdin or whoever they were playing at the time. More than 10 years ago, my friend was a face character at Disneyland and told me about her friend who was friends with Goofy, which is what you say to people when you're out of costume to preserve the magic instead of outright saying that you are the character. Allegedly, one day, when Goofy's shift was over, he was trying to walk to the back area to cool off when a very angry mum started yelling at him because he ignored her son. In reality, he couldn't see them as he turned to walk away. The lady then called him a racist and said that Goofy was ignoring them because they were black. Goofy turned around to greet the child and signed his autograph book. Then he turned to the mum and slipped up his sleeve to quickly point out his own black skin underneath before walking away. A few people have commented to say that this isn't how the costume works, and that the sleeves aren't possible to pull up from under the gloves. It could be a baloney story, but this is just what I heard from my friend who worked full-time at Disney, alongside a bunch of our other classmates from our performing arts school at the time. I was at Disneyland a couple of weeks ago, and I saw Darth Vader not cutting down younglings. It was just unprofessional as all hell. Frankly, the narrator hates all parts of Star Wars that aren't that one exact scene, which I have playing on repeat on my TV after a hard day at work, so character or not, I can understand your frustration. The type of people that play characters are very into it. If something comes up that needs to be addressed, they'll handle it in character. You've probably heard stories about characters helping kids find their parents. These days, characters always have handlers nearby that have walkie-talkies. On the Halloween night, I've seen 2 female employees working the store, not characters, clearly upset by some kind of superior order. The exact dialogue was, "Yeah, sometimes it gets hard. I know it does, but that kind of attitude is unacceptable." I couldn't resist, and I said, "I guess even in Disney, working sometimes sucks." The first girl immediately stood up and smiled as brightly as she could. "What do you mean? Working here is awesome every time." I couldn't help but feel she was agreeing with me, but never breaking the Happy Land face. This place has a dark side. My mum was a costumed character for a couple of years at Disneyland. She was very committed to keeping character, but there was one instance where she broke. 2 teens jumped her when she was playing Piglet and started attacking her. At first, she just tried to block and defend herself, but at one point she kicked one of the boys to the ground and pinned him. Considering she's 4'10" and was wearing a 50-pound costume, I consider that fairly impressive. The other kid continued attacking her, and I think she might have yelped or cried out because the kid she had pinned heard her and said, "Oh crap, it's a chick!" Like, no crap, dumb frick. Most of the shorter characters are women because, well, they're shorter. Cast members came to help her, and the kids were banned from the park. My mum got in a lot of trouble for that too, though, because she broke character. If I recall correctly, she was suspended for a couple of days. My family went to Disneyland a few times when I was a kid. My dad was just the worst parent, physically and verbally. We left him when I was 12. He was awful on vacations for just being miserable in general. It was Valentine's Day and my mum, dad, older sister and I were at one of the parks. I don't remember which one. All the characters had big red hearts on a string around their necks. My sister was, at oldest, 8 and I would have been 6. We'd just gotten ice cream and my sister and I were excitedly looking around for our favorite characters. My sister just saw Eeyore, her all-time favorite character, so she turned around and my dad, not paying attention, ran right into my sister, holding her ice cream cone and got it on his shirt. He was, to put it lightly, not very happy. She starts crying as my mum starts giving him crap while he defended his actions, saying that his daughter should have watched where she was going. The next thing we know is my sister's being hugged by Eeyore. It shocked her out of crying and she was so incredibly happy because it's Eeyore. Eeyore just kept hugging her while my mum started taking pictures. Eeyore stopped hugging my sister only to point to his paper heart, then to her. Then he hugged her again. There's a picture somewhere in my mum's basement of my sister and I standing with Eeyore, and my sister's beaming but clearly looking like she'd just been crying. I still think about Eeyore to this day and wondered what they were thinking. It was the early 90s when people were still largely expected to mind their business when it came to such things. And reading these other comments make me realize he may not have been able to do anything else anyway, but I appreciate his gesture nonetheless. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.